Chapter 1. The Arrival at Whitcomb. The mist lay like breath on the land, cool, silvered, and slow to rise. It curled through the hedgerows and clung to the stone walls of Whitcomb Hall, veiling the estate in something between memory and dream. Dawn was not yet full. The sun, still hiding behind the chalk hills, offered only a faint wash of pearl to the eastern sky, but there was movement in the trees. Somewhere beyond the boundary woods, a jay gave its sharp cry, and the rhythm of hooves, steady, deliberate, approached from the west. In the upper chamber of the south wing, Eleanor Harrow stood at the window. The glass was cold beneath her fingertips, and the scent of wood smoke clung to the chill air. She was tall for a woman, with the sort of posture that made servants nervous and vicars pause before speaking. Her hair, dark brown with strands like copper under certain light, was drawn up loosely, twisted, and pinned without ceremony. She wore a gown of blue-grey silk, its hem trimmed in darker velvet, the fabric pooling around her as she leaned into the window's stone curve. It was too fine for mourning, too fine for solitude, but it had been her mother's, and something in the hush of the house this morning had called for remembrance. Below, the gravel path leading to the front gate curved through the gardens like a river frozen in stone. The wisteria along the colonnade had begun to yellow. Summer had passed. Autumn crept over the hedgerows like a whisper. A servant would soon open the shutters. The cook would begin the bread. The steward, God help him, would again press her to write to the Earl. But in this in-between hour, while the estate still dozed in its old bones, Eleanor held the stillness for herself. And then the sound of hooves. The rider came into view moments later. He emerged from the trees like a figure conjured by old stories, broad-shouldered, dark-coated, his face still hidden beneath the wide brim of a weather-stained hat. His mount, a heavy-boned bay, was lathered at the chest and flanks, breath rising in silver plumes. The reins hung loose in one gloved hand. Dust clung to his boots and coat. A satchel hung against his thigh, the leather damp and scuffed. He did not pause at the gate. The manor's gates had stood open since midsummer, and Whitcomb welcomed few enough visitors to warrant neither lock nor guard. Still, Eleanor felt a shift in her chest as the rider passed the threshold. Not fear, something older, like instinct, like recognition from a dream she could not name. She turned from the window, her hand brushing the velvet sash at her waist. The hem of her gown whispered across the old wooden floors. There had been no letter, no announcement, no warning. The hall was colder than the chamber. Tapestries stirred in a wind that didn't move, and her steps echoed like memory across the stone. She passed the drawing-room where the hearth still smouldered from the night before. A silver tray sat forgotten on the sideboard, 2 empty teacups and the remains of last evening's apricot tart still clinging to the edge of a plate. The scent of almond and clove lingered in the air. Eleanor paused to add a log to the fire, her sleeves drawn up slightly at the wrist. Her hands were pale and slender, but calloused at the pads of her fingers, evidence of her refusal to be idle. Outside, the hoofbeats slowed. She reached the doors just as the rider dismounted. When she opened them, the morning wind swept inside, crisp with the sharp edge of rain not yet fallen. The man stood perhaps a pace from the threshold, tall and immovable, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to the living rooms of houses, but to the tense edges of battlefields. He removed his hat. Dark hair, longer than fashion dictated, curled damp against his brow. His skin was weathered, tanned to a deep olive from years of sun. His eyes, steel grey, flecked faintly with green, met hers directly. There was no startlement in them, only recognition. A scar ran from the edge of his jaw down toward his collarbone, old and half-faded, but impossible to ignore. "You are welcome to water your horse here, Captain," Eleanor said, her voice neither warm nor cold, only measured. "The farrier lives in the village, not half a mile beyond. I will have a groom see to your mount." The man nodded. "My thanks." He did not offer more. Between those truths, something small and living took root at Whitcomb, quietly, as all honest things do, with steady patience. Eleanor stepped aside, allowing the door to fall open behind her. "You've come far?" she asked. "A week from Calais. Longer still from Vienna. You crossed alone?" "Yes." His voice was low, roughened with cold and distance, but smoother than she expected. There was a faint accent, not quite French, not quite London, like someone who had lived in too many places to belong to one. She studied him carefully as they walked. His coat, though travel-worn, was of expensive wool, cut to fit broad shoulders. The high collar was damp, the silver buttons dulled by salt and road dust. Underneath, his waistcoat was a deep, dark green, the embroidery faint but meticulous. Too fine for a common soldier, he carried no visible insignia. Eleanor gestured toward the east wing. "There is a parlor this way. I imagine you'd rather not stand in the wind," he followed. The warmth of the house folded around them slowly. They passed old portraits, gilded frames of men who had worn sabres and powdered wigs, women in stiff silks with thin wrists and secrets behind their eyes. One dog barked distantly from the kitchens. Somewhere, a bell rang, and the smell of bread and hot cider rose faintly up from the lower halls. In the parlor, a fire had already been lit. "Sit," she said softly. "I'll send for tea." He hesitated, just slightly, before lowering himself into the wing-back chair. It creaked faintly under his weight. "I'll have a groom tend to your horse." He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave hers. She turned to go. "Wait," he said. She paused. "I should give my name." She lifted an eyebrow. "Captain Lucien Arden." The name settled into the room like dust. Eleanor said nothing at first. Her spine straightened, her fingers curled slightly against her skirt. That name had lived in her guardian's study once, on the edges of maps, in the margins of coded letters, in the small, sharp silence that followed talk of Prague. "I am Eleanor Harrow," she said at last, "mistress of Whitcomb in my guardian's absence." He inclined his head. Neither of them moved. Lucien Arden sat like a man used to long waits and worse company. His shoulders were too broad for the chair. His gloved hands rested on his thighs, perfectly still. Eleanor moved to the hearth and took the poker, stirring the embers back into flame. Her gown caught the light, dusty blue shifting to pewter. As she turned, the silk rippled across her frame like water. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet. "You knew my guardian." "I did." "He never mentioned you." Lucien looked into the fire. "He wouldn't have." "Because you were enemies?" "No," he said, "because we were friends." Once, she watched him carefully. A knock at the door. Mary entered, her apron dusted with flour. She curtsied and set the tea tray down with practiced efficiency. The scent of black tea, honey, and lemon peel filled the room. Beside the pot sat 2 slices of oatcake wrapped in a linen napkin, still warm from the oven. "For 2, miss?" Mary asked, her eyes darting to the captain. "Yes." Mary hesitated, then disappeared. Eleanor poured. The silver spoon clicked lightly against porcelain. "Sugar?" "1." She handed him the cup. He accepted it without thanks, lifting it in both hands like someone trying to decide whether to drink or throw it. She sat across from him, legs crossed at the ankle. "What do you want, Captain Arden?" He set the teacup down, perfectly centered on its saucer. "Shelter." "From what?" His eyes met hers, quiet and clear. "Not what," he said. "Who?" She didn't flinch. "You'll have trouble soon enough, Eleanor Harrow," he said softly. "I'd rather be standing beside you when it comes." She took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in her throat. "I didn't invite you to stay." "You didn't, but you will." Later, after he had gone to speak with the steward and see to his mount, Eleanor remained in the parlor. The tea had gone cold, the fire burned low. She reached for the oatcake Mary had left, crumbly at the edge, still tender in the center, with a whisper of cardamom and honey. She took a bite, savoring the softness, the unexpected heat of spice behind it. She had meant to feel in control. Instead, she felt watched by something deeper than history. She rose, brushing crumbs from her skirts, and walked to the mantel. A sketch hung above it, her brother's hand hastily drawn in charcoal. Lucien Arden, younger, half smiling, standing beside a map with a dagger tucked into his belt. She touched the frame. Her guardian had burned every letter bearing his name, except this one. Eleanor felt the stirring of a fate neither she nor her guardian had foreseen. Chapter 2. The Soldier at the Gate. Rain came later that day, steady and grey, like a soft drum on the roof. It began just past midday, first as a whisper on leaves, then gathering to a persistent fall that turned gravel paths to slick mud and drove the plantation's dogs into the shelter of the eaves. Eleanor walked beneath the awning of the inner courtyard, the silk of her gown damp at the hem, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her dark hair was pinned loosely, stray tendrils clinging to her neck. She watched water gather in the low stones, forming shallow mirrors that reflected the grey skies. The air smelled of wet earth, peat, and wood smoke from hearths that had struggled all morning. The drops tapped the leaded windows of the house with a hollow insistence. She had meant to write to her guardian, Sir Alistair, somewhere beyond the Channel, but every time she lifted her quill, the words scattered. The idea of putting into ink that Captain Lucien Arden had arrived pressed on her like a storm on the horizon. She dared not frame that truth. The memory of that night long ago, her guardian's trembling hand as he burned a letter, haunted her. She turned from the courtyard and padded across Coldstone to the stairwell. The west wing of Whitcomb, long unused, creaked underfoot. Drapes hung listless, furniture lay under dust sheets, and corridors smelled of mothballs and disuse. Eleanor's skirts whispered over the floorboards as she traversed the hall. The staff had removed the heavy canvas, aired the rooms, and lit hearths, yet the wing still had the sneaking chill of abandonment. Lucian, as she discovered, had unpacked nothing. His boots remained where he left them. His coat lay folded on a chair. The only movement was the quiet breath of the chamber itself. She followed him to the stables, where the groom fussed over his horse's trembling flanks, wiping away foam and muttering apologies under his breath. Eleanor lingered behind a stack of hay bales and watched. Lucien, sleeves rolled, assessed the animal with a soldier's eye. The bay's muscles were taut, the rider's touch firm. Then Lucian walked away, into the orchard, into the paths beyond. She followed quietly, keeping to the margins of hedgerows. He reached a gatepost and leaned, one boot propped on the lower rung, his coat draped over his shoulders like a dark cloak. He looked out across the fields, rain falling in thin sheets between them. Eleanor stepped from the shadows. "I thought soldiers preferred higher ground," she said. He didn't look at her. "Only when they expect to be shot at," he replied. She watched the way his coat clung damp to his shoulders, how the high collar shielded his throat. She noticed faint embroidery at his cuffs, green thread, nearly invisible. His hands, though gloved, were strong, with the shape of a man used to firm reins and heavy blades. "Should I be worried?" she asked. He turned slowly. Rain ran in rivulets off his hat brim. "You should always be worried. That's how people survive," she exhaled. "I thought that was luck." He shook his head. "Luck runs out." Lightning flickered behind distant clouds. A raven cried. The orchard trees creaked in the wind. "Why Whitcomb?" she asked quietly. "Why now?" He ran a gloved finger across the gate's wet wood. "Because it's the last place they'll look." They, his eyes sharpened, those who lost the war but still planned to win it. She frowned. "That's hardly helpful." He inclined his head slightly, voice low. "If I were more direct, you'd send me packing." She tested him. "Would I?" He watched her, then said, "You would if you were wise." She pressed her lips together, fighting a rush of frustration. Wise, safe, two words she had too rarely been. "The village is uneasy," she said. "Strangers asking about the manor, arriving from the East Road." He stiffened. "Did any enter?" "No." "They'll come back." "Are you certain?" "Yes." She paused. "Then tell me what I'm sheltering, Captain." He turned to face her fully. Rain plastered his hair to his brow. The glint of moisture traced the scar on his jaw. "You're not sheltering what, Eleanor?" "You're sheltering who?" She inhaled, her heart pounded. "And who are you, really?" He leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. "I'm the man your guardian once trusted to smuggle a treaty through 6 borders and 3 armies. I'm the man he begged not to return." Her mouth parted, but no sound came. "Why?" she asked. "Because the treaty failed." She forced the question. "And you?" His eyes hardened. "I didn't." Silence hung between them. Rain fell in steady sheets. The mist rose in the fields like ghosts. She made a choice. "Come back to the house. It's too cold and foolish to lie to each other out here." He paused, then he followed. Inside, the boy, tending the horse, stopped mid-swipe of a rag and watched Lucien pass. The manor loomed, dark and silent, windows like eyes. Inside, a letter lay unclaimed on the hall table. Her name scrawled in unfamiliar ink. Eleanor saw it first. Her fingertips trembled as she lifted it, the seal torn. Lucian came beside her. "From Alistair?" he asked. She nodded, her voice small. "Yes." He unfolded it, eyes scanning the lines. His jaw tightened. "What does it mean?" she asked. He folded the letter and turned to her. His tone was soft. "It means we're already too late." That evening they dined in the small library. The room was narrow and dim, lit by candelabra and a single hearth. The table was heavy oak, carved with vines. A single window, fogged by the rain, framed dark branches, shaking in the wind. The chairs were stiff, leather-backed, creaking under weight. Lucian sat opposite Eleanor. A roast pheasant, glistening with butter and herbs, rested on a silver platter. Around it, cut potatoes in cream, green beans, and glazed carrots. A jug of red wine shadowed in the corner. Eleanor served him first, her gloved hand steady. The meat was tender, the skin crisp, laced with sage and thyme. The wine had a deep, fruity body, with hints of blackberry and oak smoke. The candles flickered. He ate slowly, deliberating each bite. She watched him, the set of his jaw, the flash in his eyes when the wine touched his tongue, the way he swallowed a memory she could not read. When the plates were cleared, Eleanor spoke. "Do you remember me before Whitcomb?" Lucienne paused, then nodded. "When you were 12, arguing with my guardian beneath that old mulberry in Chevenix." Her breath caught. "You disliked him." His expression flickered. "He wanted to trust someone I believed unworthy. I tried to stop him. And he paid the price." She leaned back. "He never told me. Because he blamed me more than the traitor. The traitor at least wore his treachery openly." His voice trembled slightly. The fire crackled between them. She leaned forward. "I don't know whether to believe you or not." He stared at the embers, then quietly, "There are men in Dover asking after Whitcomb. Some use familiar names, others do not. How do you know this?" "I paid to know." She touched his hand, bare wrist visible beyond cuff. His skin was warm. He swallowed. "What are they looking for?" Lucian didn't look at her. "Not what. Who?" No more was spoken. Later, Eleanor walked the corridor outside his rooms, the hall lamp guttered. She paused at his door, hand hovering on the latch. She heard soft movement, no pacing, but purposeful. Maps being consulted, equipment being prepared. Outside, the storm raged. Trees whipped in the gale, rain lashed the windows. She left him to his shadows. By dawn, the next morning, she felt the weight of the unseen. Whatever they faced, it was no longer distant. Somewhere beyond Whitcomb's gates, the hunt had already begun. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Orchard. The orchard was meant for quiet reflection, but this morning it held secrets. Rows of pear and greengage trees stood heavy with dew, their branches drooping under weight. Fallen fruit lay half-hidden in moss and leaf litter, broken skins leaking golden pulp. Paths once neatly laid had vanished beneath foliage and time. The wrought-iron bench, once polished and proud, was stained with rust and shadowed by overgrowth. Eleanor slipped between branches, damp leaves brushing her skirts. Her dark hair had loosened overnight. It curled damply around her neck and shoulders. She wore a traveling mantle of forest green wool, clasped with a bronzed buckle in the shape of a fox. Her gown beneath was muted cream, trimmed with deep moss-green embroidery, which spoke of status, but not ostentation. She paused at a pear tree, listening. Voices, low, urgent, clipped. Two men. She pressed her back to rough bark, chest rising and falling. She clutched the clasp of her cloak. "There was no signpost," one voice hissed. "No crest, no announcement. Whitcomb is meant to be invisible," the other replied. "Forgotten by design." "She exists," the calm voice said, "and she shelters him." Eleanor's heart hammered. "You sure?" "I don't indulge in guesses." A branch snapped. Rain spattered the crests of leaves. She remained still. "We wait for him to show his face. Then we strike. And if he fights?" "He always fights." The voices receded. Eleanor exhaled silently, unwilling to betray any sound. Her fingers trembled at the bark's moss. "They're here, they're watching." She slipped back into the hedgerow and returned to Whitcomb, her boots damp, cloak heavy. She climbed the stairs in silence. In Lucien's room she knocked. No answer. She entered. The room was empty, neat, untouched. No coat on the chair, no letters on the desk. The journal he kept, gone. She crossed to the window. Rain pattered against panes, faded wallpaper peeled at corners. She moved to leave and heard a distant clang. She followed the sound down corridors, past servant passages and storage rooms, until she reached the ruined chapel. Lucienne crouched at the altar stone, crowbar in hand, sleeves rolled, shirt stained with dust and sweat. Sunlight fractured through the broken windows, spotlighting his concentration. His eyes were hard, determined, and when he sensed her presence, he did not startle. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice soft but urgent. He paused. Dust motes drifted in the beam of light. "I believe there's a reliquary beneath this altar. Something sealed here long ago." Her brow furrowed. "There is no relic here. In a house like Whitcomb, there is always something hidden. Leverage, memory, power." She crossed to stand beside him, the cool stone pressed against her cloak. "I heard voices, men in the orchard. They know your name. They know mine. He set the crowbar aside. He looked at her, expression haunted. Then time is shorter than I thought. They retreated to the map room, a former hunting lodging converted by her guardian's orders. The walls were lined with maps, old tomes, and hunting trophies. The fire smoldered, curtains were drawn. A single chandelier cast long shadows over the floorboards. On the table lay a leather folio, edges frayed, clasp missing a catch. Lucienne opened it and spread its contents. Architectural sketches, subterranean plans, fragmented references. Eleanor moved closer. The drawings showed Whitcomb's chapel, cellars, old drains, and a tunnel running west, deep beneath orchard walls, ending in ruins beyond the wood. A tunnel, she whispered. There was. Whether intact now, I cannot know. He traced the lines. It was sealed in 1742, after the Jacobite raids. Her fingers trembled along one line on the map. Where does it lead? To a Roman watchpost, what remains of one. I believe there is an exit there. She drew in a breath. The map felt like a bridge between what she knew and what was coming. You came here to hide, she said, not just from my guardian's enemies. He nodded slowly. His face was grey in the lamplight. I came here to seek redemption, she swallowed. My father said only traitors used tunnels. He lifted his eyes. Then your father never lost a war. A tension charged between them. She traced her fingertips across a map crease. Have you lost? He regarded her. Too many times to count. The storm that night battered Whitcomb. Thunder rolled over the hills like war drums, and lightning slashed the sky. The oak trees groaned in wind, rain hammering windows. The house trembled. Eleanor paced her chamber, unable to rest. She pulled aside curtains and looked out toward the orchard. The trees bent under the storm. In the gloom, a flicker of movement, a silhouette among branches. Her heart leapt. Later, in the servant corridor, she found him. Lucienne stood in shirt and breeches, bare feet on flagstones, examining a section of stone wall beneath the stairs. Did you hear it? He asked, voice low. Hear what? Voices within the wall. Her breath caught. From the orchard. He turned, searching her face. No, from here. He pressed on the wall. Something shifted. A panel loosened. With a soft click, stone swung inward, revealing a narrow stair descending into darkness. He held a lantern aloft. She stood behind him, cloak drawn. The steps were damp and narrow, breathing more cold than usual air. He climbed down slowly. She followed. The passage twisted, walls slick with mold, an odor of earth and brine. Her candlelight flickered. How did you know this existed? She asked. Old ledgers, architectural quirks, the alignment of walls, and the quiet footsteps in these halls that shouldn't exist. She hardly dared speak. The silence was a living thing. After long descent, Lucienne halted. A rusted gate barred their way, locked with heavy iron bars. Beyond it, stone steps climbed upward. He turned to her. You need to see what is beyond those steps. Why? Because what hunts us does not come by daylight. They climbed. The air grew lighter, fresher. Damp stone gave way to moss and creeping roots. Finally, they emerged at the base of the ruined watchtower, behind the orchard wall. Moonlight glinted on broken stones. The house stood dark ahead, windows unlit. In the shadowed tree line, two figures stood motionless, watching. Lucian's hand went to his pistol. Eleanor felt a thrum of danger. They wait for a signal, he murmured. If it doesn't come, he tightened his grip. They come anyway. She slept little that night. He too remained restless. Dawn brought no relief, only the knowledge that the chase had begun in earnest. They met in the corridor before daylight, glances exchanged like weapons. Outside, the world lay drenched, silent. Within, Whitcomb waited. Outside the orchard wall, two names were spoken like a warning. Chapter 4. Threads in the Glass. Dawn broke in silver. The sky was pale and cloud-streaked, tinged with coral just above the treetops, but the sun never quite touched Whitcomb directly. It slid across the estate like a whisper, softening sharp stone, glancing off dew-wet vines, lighting windows that still held the ghostly reflections of candlelight. Eleanor stood before the tall window in the breakfast room, her back to the door, hands loosely clasped in front of her. Her dressing gown was of pale ivory wool, belted at the waist, soft as old fleece. Her hair hung loose, curling slightly at the ends from sleep. The fine silk shift beneath the robe was the color of cream with just the faintest blush of rose at the neckline. and the fabric clung lightly to her spine where it met the morning chill. Behind her, the room glowed with warmth and scent. The breakfast table had been set with quiet reverence. A loaf of seeded rye, still warm from the oven, its crust dusted in flour, and scored with the Harrow crest. Beside it sat a pat of honeyed butter in a silver dish, curls of salted ham, and a bowl of plums so dark they might have been painted. A cafetiere steamed beside two porcelain cups. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and dark coffee lingered in the air like a promise. Lucian entered without knocking. He wore a charcoal coat over a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hair, still damp from shaving, clung to his temples. He smelled faintly of bay rum and wood smoke. A leather shoulder holster was barely visible beneath his coat, a quiet admission that breakfast, no matter how civil, did not mean peace. Eleanor didn't turn. "They moved again last night," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. Lucien stepped beside her, his gaze following hers to the edge of the orchard. The trees there were quiet now, innocent, but neither of them trusted silence anymore. "Two men," she continued, "same post, no movement between the hours of 1 and 4. Then they vanished." Lucien's jaw flexed. "They're measuring us." She turned to him then, slowly. "And what do we do while they measure?" He looked at her fully. "We measure back." They sat across from each other at the breakfast table. Lucian sliced a piece of rye and added a careful smear of butter, then a thick slice of ham, folding it like ribbon. He bit in with the deliberate, appreciative hunger of someone who hadn't tasted bread made in a proper hearth in months. Eleanor took her coffee black, unsweetened. She lifted one of the plums, studying it. The skin was taut, nearly black, but when she bit into it, the flesh burst sweet and blood-red against her tongue. "Your kitchen," Lucian said around a mouthful of bread, "could win wars." "It's lost a few," she replied, brushing crumb from her lip with a napkin. "The Earl once said my preserves were a form of blackmail." I'd believe it. He looked too comfortable in this room, in this house that was not his. It unsettled her, and worse, it intrigued her. "You've been here before," she said. It wasn't a question. Lucian sipped his coffee. "Briefly. A long time ago. The room above the stables." Her eyes narrowed. "You were one of the men in the chapel, weren't you?" His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled around the cup. "Your guardian had enemies even then," he said. "He had to hide what he knew. Where better than beneath the altar of a private chapel, in a house that doesn't exist on half the maps? And now?" Lucian stood, walked to the window again. "Now the ghosts have come looking for what he left behind." The rest of the morning passed in tense quiet. Eleanor ordered the steward to tighten the schedule of the guards. Subtle, not martial. The grooms were told to keep to their tasks. The maids were reminded not to speak to any visitors. At the edge of the orchard, a fresh basket of apples was placed, as if all was well. But inside the house, something had begun to stir. Rooms once sealed were opened, locked drawers were emptied, and down in the crypt beneath the chapel, Lucian unearthed a rusted trunk with markings Eleanor didn't recognize. Symbols etched deep into the metal, some in French, others in Latin. By noon, the sky had clouded again. Eleanor stood in her chamber, pulling on a pair of soft riding gloves. Her gown was deep emerald, trimmed in bronze-threaded lace. Her riding boots, shined and tall, reached her calves. She wore her hair back, coiled beneath a net of fine gold. Lucien waited in the courtyard, arms crossed, eyes shaded beneath the brim of a wide hat. They rode in silence, past the apple rows, beyond the west fields, toward the village. The village of St. Ridgewell lay tucked in the valley like a forgotten coin, its buildings crooked with age, roofs thatched and moss-streaked. Smoke curled from chimneys. A butcher's boy darted past, trailing a barking dog. They stopped at the apothecary. Inside, the scent of beeswax, dried sage, and vinegar filled the cramped space. Bunches of lavender and rosemary hung from the rafters. Glass bottles lined the shelves, each marked in careful, looping script. The shopkeeper, a narrow man with thinning hair and spectacles perched low on his nose, looked up and blinked. "Miss Harrow," he said. Then, cautiously, "And guest." Lucian said nothing. "I need valerian," Eleanor said. "And wormwood. Enough to dose 3 times." The apothecary raised a brow. "For livestock, I assume." "No," she said smoothly. "For nerves." He did not ask again. Lucian picked up a jar of juniper berries and studied it. When they left, the man watched them through the shop window until they rounded the bend. On the ride back, Eleanor spoke first. "What are you not telling me?" Lucian didn't answer at first, and then, "There's a courier coming. From the coast. He may not reach us." She turned sharply in the saddle. "He's bringing something." "Yes." "What?" Lucian exhaled, his breath steaming in the cold air. "Proof, and a name." She stared at him. "The man who sold your guardian to the enemy," he added. Thunder rumbled faintly to the south. That evening, Eleanor lit the fire in the drawing room herself. Lucian stood nearby, his coat discarded, waistcoat unbuttoned at the top. He had removed his holster for the first time. His shirt, simple linen, clung faintly to his chest, the edge of his old scar visible again where the collar opened. Eleanor poured 2 small glasses of elderflower cordial, rich and perfumed. She handed him one. Their fingers brushed. "I don't know whether I'd trust you," she said. "You shouldn't," he said quietly, "but I haven't lied." "No," she said, studying him, "but you've told me half the truth with perfect precision." He lifted the glass. "Half the truth is still more than most give." They drank in silence. Outside, frost kissed the windows. Somewhere in the orchard, an owl called once, then fell silent. In the room between firelight and frost, Eleanor chose to let the danger stay inside. Chapter 5. The Courier from the Coast. He arrived at dusk, half frozen and bleeding. The boy could not have been older than 17, his coat soaked through and clinging to his frame like damp paper. His boots were cracked, his left hand wrapped hastily in what looked like a strip of old shirt. His eyes were wide, grey, and rimmed with road dust. He came up the Manors Drive at a limping trot, on a roan mare, barely holding her own gait. Eleanor heard the hoofs first, uneven and fast, then the cry from the stable hand, "Rider!" from the West Road. By the time she reached the front hall, Lucian was already at the door, revolver in hand. Eleanor brushed past him. The boy slid from the saddle and staggered. Eleanor caught his shoulders just before he hit the stone. "Message," he gasped. "Captain Arden, Whitcomb." His body collapsed against her. She lowered him gently. Blood was already soaking through his wrappings. Lucian knelt beside them. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He lifted the boy's chin and checked his pulse. "Still alive," he muttered. "Get him to the library. I need boiling water, brandy, bandages, and a fire, now." Eleanor barked orders. Within minutes, the boy had been carried to the firelit library and laid on the chaise. His clothes were cut away with sharp scissors. Beneath the layers of wool and linen, Eleanor saw what had torn him, a blade wound, clean but deep, just below the ribs. Lucian worked with quiet skill, hands steady, expression unreadable. The boy moaned once as the brandy touched the wound, then went silent again. Eleanor hovered nearby, a folded blanket clutched in her hands. When it was done, and the wound stitched with careful economy, Lucian sat back on his heels. "He was followed," he said. "How do you know?" Lucian reached into the inner lining of the boy's coat and withdrew a small roll of oilcloth. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a sheet of paper folded twice and sealed in black wax. The seal bore a falcon's talon piercing a rose. Eleanor froze. "I've seen that mark before." Lucian didn't answer. He took the letter to the hearth and turned it in the firelight. The wax shimmered, no longer just black, but streaked faintly with gold. "It's coded," he said. "Can you break it?" "I don't have to," he said. "This one was meant for me." He opened it. The letter was short, 5 lines. Eleanor moved to his side, and she read the words silently, then again. "They are within the circle. The name is known, contact was made, the red thread is yours. Harrow is not what you think." Lucian folded the paper once, then dropped it into the fire. Eleanor stared at the curling edges. "Why burn it?" "Because I already know who wrote it," he said. "And who was it?" Lucian looked at her. "Someone who once loved your guardian, and someone who may now want you dead." They did not eat until late. Dinner was laid in the solar, a modest spread of stewed partridge with garlic, white beans in rosemary broth, and flatbread warm from the coals, brushed with butter and sprinkled with coarse salt. A sharp cheese had been laid beside a dish of quince preserve, and a silver ewer of mulled wine steamed gently between them. Lucian sat with his coat draped over the back of his chair, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled again. His hair had dried, curling slightly at the ends. The firelight turned his skin bronze. Eleanor ate slowly, spooning the broth with care, but her eyes remained on the door, on the window, on the growing dark. "Did you understand the letter's code?" she asked. Lucian took a sip of wine. "I understood enough." "The red thread, is that you?" "No," he said, setting the cup down. "It's you." Her breath stilled. He looked at her, voice steady. "You are what remains of Whitcomb's last secret, the one no one outside the house was ever meant to find." "I don't know anything," she whispered. "Not yet," he agreed. "But someone believes you might." She set down her spoon. I'm not afraid of being hunted, she said. You should be, he replied, voice low, but in his eyes there was something else, something quieter, something that said you are not alone. After supper, Eleanor went to the sick room. The boy courier lay beneath 2 wool blankets, breathing shallowly. A small lamp burned beside him. On the table next to his bed, someone had placed a bowl of broth, still steaming, and a small apple sliced neatly on a plate. Eleanor reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his brow. He stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. Miss, he rasped, I was told you'd be kind. I try to be, she said. He swallowed. The man who gave me the letter, he said if you ask me his name, I should say only this. Tell her the hourglass has turned. Eleanor's blood went cold. Did he give you a name at all? She asked. The boy's eyes drifted shut again. Only one. Bellwether. Eleanor found Lucian in the chapel. He sat in the shadows near the altar, legs stretched out, head tipped back against the cold stone. The oil lantern beside him cast flickering golden light across the lines of his face. He did not look like a man resting. She stepped quietly into the room, the hem of her nightdress trailing just above the floor, the robe over her shoulders deep blue velvet, cinched tightly. He opened his eyes. He told me a name, she said. Lucienne stood slowly. Whose? Bellwether. Lucian went still, utterly still. That name died 12 years ago, he said. Not quite, she said. He also said this, the hourglass has turned. Lucienne swore under his breath. She stepped closer. What does it mean? Lucien's gaze held hers. It means we're out of time. In the darkness of the chapel, Eleanor felt the weight of a secret that had waited too long. Chapter 6. Names Not Buried. Rain returned just after midnight, light this time but persistent, like fingers tapping across every glass surface in Whitcomb Hall. The hearths hissed and crackled, the sconces burned low, shadows gathered thick around the stairwells, and the house sighed with the weight of old stone. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood barefoot in the corridor outside her chamber, a thick cashmere shawl drawn over her nightdress, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the cuffs, soft and old from wear. Her hair was unbound, tumbling in dark, loose waves down her back. She held a candle in one hand, the flame shivering with each draught. Beyond her, the west wing slumbered. Lucien's door stood slightly ajar. She should have walked past. She didn't. The room was dim, lit only by the dull glow of coals in the hearth and the golden spill of lamplight from a desk in the far corner. The scent of parchment, ink, and rain-dampened wool lingered in the air. His coat was slung over a chair. His boots were beside it. Lucian sat at the desk, head bowed, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, the skin beneath pale and faintly scarred. A small cut ran diagonally across his collarbone, a fresh wound, still red. He was writing in a narrow, deliberate hand on thick vellum, the edge of one page singed black. He looked up as she entered. Her bare feet made no sound against the rugs. You shouldn't be here, he said, not unkindly. I know. Then why are you? She stepped inside, closed the door softly behind her. The name the boy spoke, Bellwether, it silenced you. Lucian set his pen aside. The room held its breath. It was a name I buried, he said, with the worst part of myself. Eleanor crossed to the hearth, knelt and fed a log into the coals. The heat kissed her face, soft and dry. She didn't look at him as she asked, who was he? Lucian stood slowly. He was one of us. Once. They moved to sit near the fire, on the rug, across from each other. Lucian sat with one knee drawn up, wrist draped over it, the flicker of flame turning the angles of his face to sculpture. His expression was unreadable, but his voice softened as he spoke. Bellwether wasn't a code name at first. It was his surname, Thomas Bellwether, from a good family, dead brother in India, raised on empire and expectation. And he was a soldier? No, Lucian said. He was worse, a strategist. She tilted her head. You don't like tacticians? I like them well enough, when they leave the killing to those who know its cost. He looked away, as if remembering. We trained together, 2 years in Austria. He was brilliant, calculating. He saw the future in 12 moves. But he had no loyalty to anything, not to country, not to king, not even to comrades. You were close. Lucien's smile was faint and bitter. I thought so. He had a way of making you feel chosen. Eleanor's voice dropped. Was he responsible for what happened to my brother? Lucian was quiet a long time. I don't know, he said finally, but I believe he was part of it. The letter your guardian received, wrapped around your brother's ring, was in Bellwether's cipher. Her hands curled in the folds of her shawl. My brother, she said quietly, used to carry sweets in his pocket for the stable cats. He would sneak into the kitchen to steal gooseberries for me. He wasn't a traitor. No, Lucian agreed. He was a boy. That's what made him useful. He reached into his coat and removed something small, a leather-bound notebook, the size of a palm. He handed it to her. Eleanor opened it slowly, and the first page held a rough sketch of Whitcomb, not its facade, but its underground plans, vaults, tunnels, secret staircases. "This is his," she whispered. "It's his hand. I found it in the trunk beneath the chapel floor." Hidden in oilcloth, she turned the page. On the second leaf, a single line of script in Latin: Fidem fallit qui prodest. He betrays faith who profits by it. The ink was blurred, as though someone had touched it too many times. She closed the book and looked at Lucian. "Show me the place where you found it." He led her down the spiral stair behind the St. Margaret tapestry, through a door she'd never seen. The stone steps descended into darkness, slick with moss, the air growing colder with each turn. When they reached the bottom, she inhaled sharply. The room was small, vaulted, lined with ancient books bound in cracked leather. Cobwebs laced the corners. A faint scent of mildew and old ink hung in the air. In the center sat a desk, and atop it, a glass case. Inside, a single glove, torn at the palm, and a silver signet ring. Her breath caught. She moved to the case, her hand hovered above it. "This is my father's crest," she whispered. Lucian nodded. "Your brother wore it." She turned to him. "But you said he died." "I said he was lost. The body was never recovered. The report was convenient." Eleanor stared at the ring. "Do you believe he's alive?" Lucian didn't answer, but something in his expression said yes. She reached into the case and picked up the glove. It was stiff with blood, dried, darkened. Lucienne stepped closer. "That was sent to your guardian the day before the treaty in Marseille collapsed. The ring was inside the glove." Eleanor dropped her gaze, as if to say, "Your heir is the price." Lucienne said nothing. Then, quietly, "There's more." He pulled back a loose panel in the wall behind the case. Inside, a second compartment, and within that, a cloth-wrapped object. He unrolled it on the table. It was a dagger, beautiful, old, bone-handled, and carved into the hilt, the same falcon's talon crest as the letter from the courier. Eleanor touched it, cold, balanced, lethal. "What is this?" Lucien's voice was quiet. "Proof. That bellwether was here, or worse, someone he trained." The air in the chamber shifted. She looked up at him, standing close now, closer than they'd ever been. The candlelight gilded his cheekbones, cast his eyes in shadow. His breath was warm against her temple, and suddenly the silence between them was thick, humid with unspoken thoughts. Tension spun between fingers and half-said truths. She reached for his hand. He stilled, but did not pull away. Her fingers brushed a scar on his palm, rough, raised. "What did you lose?" she asked softly. His eyes flicked to hers. He didn't answer. They sat again on the stone floor, side by side this time, close enough to share heat. The hours passed in slow breaths. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "When I was a girl, I once heard my father say that love is a debt only the dead can pay. I never understood what he meant." Lucienne stared at the firelight dancing on the dagger's blade. "He meant that love, when it costs too much, becomes memory." She looked at him. "You're afraid I'll remember something that damns us both." "No," he said. "I'm afraid you'll remember something that makes you trust me." They returned upstairs just before dawn. Eleanor paused at the door to her room. The corridor was silent, touched with pale light. Behind her, Lucian stood quietly, arms crossed. She turned to him, searching. "What happens now?" Lucienne hesitated. Then, softly, "We don't sleep. We prepare. We read what your brother left behind." She nodded, then opened her door and disappeared into the shadows of her chamber. Eleanor did not go straight to sleep. Instead, she sat by her window, the velvet curtains parted, the pale light filtering through. On her lap, the notebook. On her palm, the signet ring. She traced its edge with her thumb, thinking not just of her brother, but of Lucien, of his hand on hers, of the firelight on his scar. "You're afraid I'll trust you," she thought, "and yet you keep giving me reasons to." She set the ring on her bedside table, and finally laid her head down to sleep. Below Whitcomb, a name long buried opened the way to a deeper betrayal. Chapter 7. The Visitor at the Gates. A dawn mist clung low across the parkland, rising like smoke from the wet earth. The hedgerows glistened with dew, the scent of damp oak and moss weighed in the air. Eleanor heard the distant toll of the gate bell, once, twice. She should have been rising with the first rays, but sleep had fled her earlier, chased by dreams of dagger points and whispered names. She stood at the tall casement window of the drawing room, the pale linen curtains drawn slightly aside. Her nightdress, white muslin trimmed with lace, hung loose about her knees. Her hair fell down her back in soft, tangled waves. In the quiet half-film of dawn, she felt more exposed than usual. The figure arrived as the sun hesitated, half hidden behind heavy clouds. A carriage, wheels muffled by grass and soil, turned onto the drive. Two horses in padded harness, their coats slick in the mist. A footman stood at the door, gloved hands folded. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She turned just in time to see Lucien enter behind her, clothed now in dark blue riding coat, brass buttons undone at the throat, cravat loose. He carried no weapon overtly, though she recognized the slight bulge under his lapel. "Visitor," she said, voice raw. He nodded, eyes on the drive, discreet, no escort, likely a messenger, or worse. They moved down the staircase, each step echoing. The corridor seemed hollow, as though the walls themselves held their breath. At the front hall, the figure stood behind the open carriage door. A woman, not old, but sharper than youth, with pale skin cut by lines of worry. Her hair, steel blonde, was drawn back tightly. She wore a traveling habit of deep burgundy, trimmed in black velvet and edged with silver embroidery. A muff hung in her gloved hands. Her eyes, when she met Eleanor's, were a startling shade of ice blue, bright and assessing. The footman offered his hand. The woman declined. Stepping down with a gait both regal and measured, Lucian stepped forward. "Miss Harrow," the woman said, voice firm, clear. "And Captain Arden, I presume." Eleanor felt something in the woman's gaze, familiarity veiled, like a half-remembered echo. "How may I," Eleanor began, "help you in these strange hours?" The woman smiled briefly, no warmth, but recognition. "I come bearing news, a letter, and a warning." The messenger removed a slender envelope sealed in red wax. The crest was a falcon's talon piercing a rose, the mark of Bellwether's circle. Eleanor's breath caught. Lucien tensed, eyes narrowing. "May I see it?" Eleanor asked. The woman handed it to Lucien, who slipped into the library to break the seal. Eleanor followed, every footfall a drumbeat in her chest. The library fire was light, just embers. Lucien knelt by the hearth, the envelope trembling slightly in his hand. He broke the wax, crack, and drew out a sheet of pale parchment. Eleanor leaned forward. The message, in her brother's handwriting, read, "She knows more than you think. Trust no one of your blood. The blade's edge is closer than you believe." The ink was smudged in places, as though hastily written or wept over. Beneath the words, her brother's signature, Edward Harrow. The silence after reading stretched taut. "This was written by my brother," Eleanor whispered. Her heart thundered. "He is trying to speak from beyond the grave." Lucian's jaw set. "Then Bellwether's reach extends deeper than we knew. Why send this now?" The messenger spoke then. "I am called Marguerite Duclos. I served your guardian in Paris. I was part of that circle, of those who opposed the treaty. I watched Bellwether fall. Not all assumed him dead. Some said he slipped into shadow. Others said he reinvented himself under new names." She paused, eyes flicking between them. "I believe he now moves again, and my sources tell me your house is in his path." Eleanor's fingers trembled around the envelope. She looked at Lucien. "Will you read the message to me?" He stepped into the firelight, voice soft but certain. As he read it aloud again, line by line, the creaking shelves, the smell of old leather and tea, the faint echo of rain against windows, all seemed to lean in. When he finished, Eleanor met Marguerite's eyes. "Why risk your life to bring this?" Marguerite's lips thinned. "Because I owe your father more than debt. I owe him repentance." The room held its breath. In the hush, the distant crash of thunder rolled across the hills. They set the visitor in the guest parlor. A small fire, fresh tea, biscuits, and candied ginger were brought. Eleanor poured. The silver teapot glowed subtly. Marguerite accepted with a dip of her head. Her eyes never left Eleanor. Lucien, restless, paced the length of the room. Each time he passed Marguerite, she studied him, cool, measured. Eleanor seated herself across from her, hands clasped. "A warning, a letter, both in your brother's hand," Eleanor said. "That cannot be coincidence." Marguerite sipped her tea. The curl of steam rose between them like a veil. "Men alive in Paris whisper that Bellwether's circle still sends messages, threats, lures, memory weapons. He uses what you love most against you." She paused. "I once believed your guardian safe. I was wrong." Lightning flashed outside. momentarily brightening the windows. Shadows scurried across the walls. Lucian froze at that flash. Eleanor noticed how the firelight caught the scar along his cheek. She asked, "What do you mean by lures?" Marguerite's lips pressed. She said quietly, "Bellwether never kills outright. He entraps, he reveals, he fractures trust. He turns your greatest strength against itself." The color drained from Eleanor's face. Lucien crossed to her and laid a hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone in this." Marguerite rose, gathering her muff. "My task is done. I will stay until dark. If Bellwether moves tonight, I will warn you." She inclined her head and left. Footsteps muffled on the carpet. Lucien closed the door behind her. Eleanor rose, walked over. He turned. "You said your brother signed treaties with me, that he may not be dead." She looked up at him, tears unbidden. "I want to believe." Lucien's expression softened. "And I will help you." They spoke little the rest of the day. Storm clouds built. The wind began in the trees. The estate quieted under watch. Eleanor retreated to the hidden chamber behind the chapel. She sat before the glass case, staring at the dagger, the ring, the glove. The notebook lay open at her feet. Pages crinkled. She turned the ring in her palm. Her brother's name, her father's crest. The burden of lineage weighed upon her. Lucien entered quietly. He joined her on the low stone floor. Close, but not touching, he took her hand. "You must rest," he said. "But I fear tonight is no rest." She looked at him. His eyes were soft, troubled. "Stay with me," she whispered. He nodded. He pulled his coat over her shoulders, the fabric light but firm. She leaned into it. Against his chest she felt the steady beat of his heart. "You trust me," she said. He hesitated, then kissed the back of her hand. "With my life." They sat in silence, the flame flickering. Outside the old panes, sheets of rain began again. Night deepened. They took lanterns and walked the corridors. Servants had been instructed to bed early. The manor was hushed. In the courtyard, lantern light glowed through windows like watchfires. At the chapel door, Lucien pressed his back against the stone wall. "Stay here," he told Eleanor. "Be ready." She nodded. Her heart pounded. He slipped inside. Moments later, a desperate whisper of movement. Eleanor heard a scuff, a gasp, a chair knocked over. Then Lucien's voice, low but firm, calling a name. "Bellwether!" She rushed in behind him. In the darkness of the chapel, she saw a figure stepping back, hooded cloak half falling. The dagger glinted in one hand. Lucien strode forward. The intruder flinched. "Yield," Lucien said. "No more games." The figure pulled the hood back. The pale blonde face was Marguerite's, but her eyes, shame, betrayal, fear, all flickered in that moment. "Forgive me," she said. "But he made me weak." She raised the dagger. Eleanor gasped. In one movement, Lucien stepped between them. The blade caught light and hissed past his cheek. He seized Marguerite's wrist, twisted, disarmed her. The dagger skittered across stone, sparks glancing. Marguerite fell to her knees, sobbing. "I tried to warn him. I tried to betray myself." Lucien dropped her and turned to Eleanor. "Get back," he spat, voice edged. Eleanor froze. Lucien's hand was pressed to his cheek. Blood glistened. He cradled the cut, face pale. He stood firm, the silent chamber echoing with betrayal. Marguerite on her knees, weeping. Eleanor stunned between them. The air between Lucien and Eleanor crackled. Danger, desire, betrayal, sorrow. They led Marguerite to the guest parlor. She sat, head bowed. Eleanor fetched water, bandages, and wine. Lucien stood by the window, stormlight fracturing his silhouette. The wound was shallow, but still, blood. Eleanor knelt beside Marguerite. The woman's face glimmered with tears. She offered no defense, only truth. "He controls every whisper. He told me your brother's death was necessary. He said, 'Only when the hourglass turns will she rise.'" Eleanor's breath stung. She looked at Lucien. He watched them both. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed, heart hammering. Every creak of floorboard, every wind gust felt like footsteps approaching. Beside her, she found Lucien's coat. She slipped her fingers into his breast pocket and found Marguerite's envelope, the one with her brother's note. She pressed it to her cheek, heart thudding. Tomorrow would force choices. Tonight, she clung to the thread between memory and betrayal. At Whitcomb's gates, a visitor had come with old blood and sharper stakes, but it was inside where the blades would be drawn. Chapter 8. Shadows Unmasked. Dawn found Whitcomb grey and still. Mist curled low in the hollows, and the walls of the house stood silent, save for the drip of last night's rain from the eaves. Eleanor woke with a tightness in her chest, her pillow damp from restless sleep. The envelope stolen from her pocket lay on the bedside table. She touched it briefly, then turned the other cheek to the dawn. Lucien was already gone. She rose and dressed slowly. A gown of forest green with a velvet bodice, her hair knotted at the nape of her neck. A silver comb held it in place, small but unmistakable in the muted light. She found him in the chapel, pacing. His shirt was white, unbuttoned at the throat, sleeves rolled. His trousers bore dampness at the knees, proof he had moved within the crypts. His eyes were sharp, fixed on the open secret chamber beyond the altar. "Did you sleep?" she asked. Her voice was hushed. He started slightly, then turned. "Not well." She joined him in the chamber. The dagger lay on the table, slick with faint residue. The signet ring glinted. The gloves splayed as though dropped in haste. Books were strewn, some open, some piled. The air smelled of earth, dust, faint decay, and something older still, a hidden menace. "Follow me," Lucien said, reaching for a pair of oil lanterns. They wound through passageways newly explored, corridors that felt unfamiliar, staircases whose rails must have shifted in centuries. The torchlight flickered across stone walls, laced with veins of quartz, and the echoes of their footsteps sank, as though swallowed by the fabric of the house itself. At last Lucien paused before a blank wall behind the chapel's altar. He pressed a hidden latch. The stone sank inward, revealing a narrow, cold passage. Eleanor swallowed. She followed. The tunnel was low, damp, slick. The air was thicker, heavier, charged with old breaths and distant sighs. Their lanterns cast long shadows. Her dress brushed damp walls. The stone underfoot was ancient and uneven. At the end, the passage opened into a shallow chamber. Candles mounted in iron sconces glowed dimly. In the center, a podium, and upon it a leather-bound codex, bound in blackened steel clasps and etched with the talon and rose crest. Lucien approached, hand trembling, and opened the codex. Eleanor stood behind him, her heart loud in her ears. Inside were pages of ciphered treaty drafts, secret correspondences, names, Bellwether, Arden, Harrow, Marguerite's name too, crossed out. On one page was a map, a hidden road through Whitcomb grounds, an exit to the Downs. On another, a set of instructions. When the hourglass completes, open the gate to Blood's Heir. His breath caught. "Gate to Blood's Heir," he repeated. She felt her fingers tighten around her shawl. Lucien traced names with his finger. "Your brother appears in margin notes, once under E. Harrow, once under code The Thistle. Whoever wrote this, he intended you to see." Her voice trembled. "This is proof." He looked back at her. "Proof, yes, but not the full story." She swallowed. "What story?" He closed the codex slowly. "Someone manipulated your entire heritage. Someone tied Bellwether's circle to your lineage." They rose, lanterns in hand, codex carefully wrapped. They returned through the dark paths to Whitcomb. The air felt colder now, the night sharper. In the library, Lucien placed the codex on the table. He drew pens, inkwells, parchment. He lit candles. His face by lamplight looked weary and fierce in turns. Eleanor watched him, heart torn. She thought of her brother, of her father, of shadows that moved just beyond memory. He spoke after a moment. "We will transcribe this, decode it, and follow the road. But tonight I must go out." Fear leapt in her chest. "Alone?" He hesitated, fingers poised. "Yes." She moved so fast she caught him by the sleeve. "I go with you." He looked down at her, the lamplight trembling across his eyes. Finally his lips curved with a softness she had not expected. "No, some dangers I must bear alone. Others I will not make you bear." She nearly protested. Instead, she collected the codex, layered a thick cloak over gown, strapped her dagger in hidden beneath folds. When night came, Lucien left by the secret corridor. Eleanor watched his back, broad in silhouette, until the corridor's light swallowed him. Then she crept to her window and pressed her hands to cold glass, watching for the lantern. Time passed, a distant flicker, movement beyond tree line. Lucien's lantern, dancing, he traced the mapped route. She exhaled, a sound she did not realize she'd been holding. She returned to the library, clearing away books, arranging the codex beneath maps. Her hand touched the dagger's hilt as if seeking its comfort. A soft knock at the door startled her. Lucien entered, wind-whipped, cloak damp, eyes bright with urgency. He shut the door behind him before she spoke. He came forward, steadied his breathing, and said, "They've breached the east wall." Guards sound alarms. Her heart pounded. He touched her face with a gentle hand. "They are coming for you." "Then we fight," she said, voice hard. He drew her close. The lamplight cast long shadows. The coded pages lay open, maps alive beneath their hands. They didn't wait for assault. They rode out, on horseback, through the misted gardens, following the secret map. The night was thick, branches scratching at cloaks, lanterns swaying. Eleanor leaned close to Lucian, the weight of the codex between them. She felt his shoulder against hers. The scent of his coat of damp leather and gunpowder filled her senses. They reached a gate, ancient iron, hidden beyond hedgerows, just as torches blossomed in the distance. Figures moved beyond the gate, men cloaked, blades glinting. Lucian halted. He slipped the codex into a pouch at his side, then turned to Eleanor. "Stay behind me," she nodded. He pushed open the gate. The men charged. Steel rang. Lucian drew his pistol in one hand, his blade in the other. She drew hers. They fought back to back, blades flashing, gunshot in night air. Eleanor's heart hammered. Adrenaline surged. She felt the tang of sweat, the sting of cold rain, the taste of fear sharpened by resolve. When the first attacker lunged, Lucienne intervened. She parried another. Sparks flew as steel struck stone. Her skirts were torn, her glove cut. Blood bloomed on linen, but she held firm. Then Lucian shouted, and the men fell back, retreating into shadow. The gate slammed closed behind them, chains rattling. They stood panting, faces grim, cloaks soaked, swords humming. Eleanor's heart ached. Lucian reached for her, pulling her close. She felt the press of his cloak, the steadiness of his hand. "We held them," he said quietly. She breathed, trying to steady. "For now," he nodded. They turned back to the ride home, battered but unbroken, the codex safe, their resolve steeled. When dusk finally yielded and moonlight bled across the lawns, Eleanor understood that the next strike would come from within. Chapter 9, Beneath the Parlour Masks. Mist clung low over Whitcomb at first light, wrapping the building in a veil of grey serenity that felt too peaceful. The air was cold, damp, and pregnant with something unsaid. Eleanor awoke before dawn, uneasy and alert. She rose in silence, her silk nightshift whispering on the polished floor, and moved to the window. The hedgerows glistened with dew, the stone walls of the manor darkened by moisture. She could see a single gardener in the distance, bent over the shrubs as if tending them, but possibly watching. Her heart prickled. She dressed swiftly in a gown of charcoal silk, the kind that would not show stains or betray her haste. Her hair, dark as a raven's wing, was pinned into a loose knot at her neck. She tucked the silver signet ring inside her bodice, near her heart. She passed the portrait hall, its framed faces gazing down in silent judgment. The hush of the house felt heavier than any storm. In the breakfast hall she found Lucian already seated. The table held plain fare, buttered bread, fresh eggs, stewed apples with cinnamon, and a small pot of strong coffee. The staff moved quietly, glancing at Eleanor with something behind their eyes. Fear, guilt, caution. Mr. Kingsley, the steward, stood at the sideboard, his face drawn under the soft light. Mrs. Holcombe waited at the threshold, pale, composed. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. The aroma, bitter, dark, was a grounding thread. Her eyes narrowed as she passed Kingsley. He did not meet her gaze. When she sat, Lucian leaned in. "Signs in your wing last night. Footprints, mud, tracks through your corridor." She nodded. "Someone betrayed our trust." He set his cup down. "I observed Kingsley near the corridor behind the kitchens just before midnight. The locks were sound, but the doors partially ajar." Her pulse quickened. "He has keys. He has access." She swallowed and continued breakfast with measured calm, tasting the sweet, tart apples, biting bread crisped with butter, hiding the royal of anxiety. After breakfast she dismissed staff, asking Lucienne to remain. She cleared the table herself, stacking plates, folding napkins, watching the others leave with a practiced calm. When the last servant departed, she turned to Lucian. I know there is a traitor among us," she said, voice low, sharp. "Within these walls." He nodded. "And I believe they move in corridors the rest of us avoid." They moved to the map room, where light filtered through mullions in dust motes. The codex lay open, maps spread. Lucian pointed to a faded sketch, a hidden stair behind the wine cellar, a narrow servant's passage behind the steward's office, an unused tunnel behind the kitchens. Eleanor traced her finger over that corridor. Kingsley had keys to all these, and he claimed to inspect provisions in those wings. She paused, voice controlled. "He may have been lying." Lucian's eyes glinted. "We must test. Tonight, leave some doors unlocked. Watch who passes. Trap them." She folded her fingers. "Yes." The morning passed in strain and quiet. Eleanor visited the kitchens under guise of oversight, breathing the scent of roasting meats, herbs, wood smoke. She observed Mrs. Holcombe in the corner, wiping her hands on her apron. The hem of Mrs. Holcombe's sleeve bore faint dust and a small smudge, dark like ink, too deliberate to be dirt. Eleanor's pulse twisted. She made a mental note. In the steward's office, she paused by the ledger shelf. One book had been moved, a lined ledger under heavier binding than the others. Its pages stuck at an odd angle. She tugged it free and opened it. Her breath caught. Inside, ciphered entries, names in the margins, references to gate openers, air paths, blood thread. The handwriting in places echoed her brother's. Her heart surged. She slipped the ledger shut and backed away. She stumbled into Lucian, who was behind her silently. He caught her arm. "Found something?" She held the ledger. His face darkened. "We have proof." They hurried from the room. That evening, a formal dinner was arranged. The great hall glowed with candlelight. Chandelier crystals caught soft firelight. The table gleamed with silver, pheasant roasted with chestnuts, glazed carrots, crisp potatoes, blackberry tarts for after, and a fine red wine. The staff stood at attention. The tension was a silent lodestar. Eleanor entered in a gown of deep burgundy silk, sleeves trimmed with black lace, hair dressed high with silver pins. Lucienne stood beside her, coat cut sharp, cravat tied but loose, the look of a man preparing for battle. She addressed the assembled staff, steward, butler, governess, kitchenhead, stable master, in measured tone. "We have reason to believe betrayal walks among us, behind familiar faces." She held the ledger, and all eyes turned to Kingsley, who paled. Evidence of ciphered notes, of passages traversed unseen, of allegiance sold, lies within this book. She opened the ledger and read aloud names, references to hidden passages, coded assignments, entries in Bellwether's cipher. The butler's hand tightened on his tray. The kitchen master's face blenched. Mrs. Holcombe's fingers jabbed her apron. She stepped toward Kingsley. "You betrayed me for promises from Bellwether's hand. You used access given in trust to enable the enemy's infiltration." Kingsley's lips quivered. He tried to speak, but no words came. Lucian rose, stepping between Eleanor and the steward. "You will explain," Lucian's tone firm. Mrs. Holcombe gasped, then rushed forward. I was compelled. His threats, for my daughter's safety. He forced me." Eleanor's chest tightened. "You delivered messages, unlocked doors, carried secrets. But you had choice." Holcombe gasped. "I obeyed, or he killed her." The room fell into stunned silence. The firelight flickered over faces. Fear, regret, betrayal. Eleanor looked at Lucien. He nodded slightly. "To the servant wing," Eleanor commanded. "They shall be confined until I decide their fate." Guards moved in to restrain Kingsley and Mrs. Holcombe. They were led away, shackled in silence. The butler and kitchen master averted their eyes. The hush in the hall was deeper than any storm. Later, Eleanor, Lucienne, and Edward, her brother, newly returned, gathered in the map room by candlelight. The ledger rested between them. The codex lay open. Kingsley's betrayal, Holcombe's coerced complicity. They now had the names, the passages, the cipher. They plotted countermeasures, locks changed, corridors sealed, double guards, coded passes. Edward touched the ledger. "He used Kingsley long ago. He threatened him with ruin, death. He built a network inside Whitcomb before we even knew his voice cracked. I should have spoken sooner." Eleanor's throat tightened. She crossed to him. "You kept silent to protect me." Edward shook his head. "I feared Bellwether's reach, but now I act." Lucienne mapped a sweep. First perimeter, then interior. Eleanor studied the hidden stair behind the kitchens. He gestured to a passage through the steward's office that led beneath the floors. "I will lead a patrol tonight. You stay here." He looked at Eleanor. "But you must be ready." She squared her shoulders. "I will help." He took her hand. Their closeness flared something in her chest, but there was no time for softness yet. Night fell. The wind moaned, knocking tree limbs against windows. The household was tense, hushed by fear. Eleanor dressed in dark riding clothes, boots, cloak. She carried a dagger at her thigh, the ring hidden, the codex sealed in leather. Lucian readied sidearms and lanterns. They moved through corridors, silent footsteps, shadows shifting. They paused at the steward's wing. Inside, Kingsley and Holcombe paced in separate chambers under guard. Kingsley's face was wasted. Mrs. Holcombe sobbed softly. Lucian pressed his ear to the wall. No whispers. They advanced to the corridor behind the kitchen, doors ajar. Lucian kicked them open. The room beyond was empty, papers tossed, dust scattered. The hidden stair was open. They descended. The underpass was narrow, walls slick, echoing drips. Shadows flickered. Lucian's lantern cast long fingers. Eleanor followed close. At the foot of the stairs, they found a new trap, a hastily erected barrier of crates and chairs blocking a passage. On a crate lay a cipher sheet torn. The air crosses tonight. Eleanor's heart hammered. They pressed on until the passage opened into the steward's office. The broken desk lay overturned. A secret panel gaped. Evidence of intrusion lay scattered. A partial map drawn in Bellwether's hand was pinned to the wall. Suddenly the lights went out. Lanterns flickered, then died. In the blackness, footsteps. A door slammed. Echoing footsteps receding. Lucien whispered, "After them." They dashed back up corridor, through kitchen, into the great hall. The windows were dark. Flickers of torchlight appeared beyond the east wall gates. They flung open doors to the courtyard. Guards rushed past. Beyond the gates, cloaked figures advanced. Men in grey cloaks, swords bright, faces hidden. Lucian drew his pistol. Eleanor's dagger glinted in the moonlight. Edward flanked them. The assault began. Steel sang, swords clashed, guards shouted, rain hissed overhead. Eleanor's cloak was torn, her gloves slashed. She parried a blow, steadied her footing. Lucien fired. Men fell. Edward fought with grim determination. In the chaos, a figure in cloak moved toward the house. Lucien intercepted. The blade flashed. They grappled. In the lamplight, Eleanor recognized the face. Holcomb's messenger, now cloaked. She lunged, stabbed the blade from his hand. He fell back, gasping. The battle halted. Men retreated. The gate slammed closed behind them. Rain pounded. The courtyard was strewn with discarded cloaks, broken weapons, silence. Eleanor's knees trembled. She stared into the night. Lucien reached her, drenched, breathing hard. He clasped her hand. Edward stood apart, scanning the darkness. Inside, the household emerged. Guards, staff, frightened faces. Eleanor stood before them all, soaked, unbowed. Her voice rang over ringing swords and storm. "Whitcomb's walls have betrayed me," she said, "but its heart remains. Let all know, no more secrets, no more traitors." Her eyes swept the faces. Kingsley and Holcomb stood, shackled, guarded. The staff trembled. She continued, "We rebuild now, with truth. We guard every corridor, seal every secret, and we root out the poison." Thunder rolled. The sky cracked. The household held its breath. Lucien leaned to her. "You did this." She nodded, voice quiet but firm. "I will not fail again." In the house where loyalty slept, betrayal awoke, and Eleanor would not rest until every mask was torn away. Chapter 10. The Walls Unravel. The dawn following the attack at the gates felt brittle and fragile, as though the world itself held its breath, uneasy after the violence of the night. Mist lingered low over the lawns. The hedgerows dripped with moisture. The stones of Whitcomb seemed to sag under some unseen weight. Eleanor awoke with a start, her limbs stiff, her chest tight. The echo of blades, the clash of steel, the gasp of traitors' voices, all still rang in her mind. She rose quietly, slipped into her riding habit of deep slate grey, trimmed with black lace, pinned her hair back with a silver comb, and tucked the signet ring beneath her cloak against her heart. The dagger she wore hiddenly in her boot made her step more cautious, as though she expected betrayal at every threshold. She moved through the corridors, a silent shadow, passing portraits whose faces looked down in accusation. The hush in the house was ominous. Servants moved quietly, doors closed early, eyes averted. In the great hall, Lucien stood near the windows, looking out over the dew-soaked grounds. His coat was dark, unbuttoned, his face drawn. Rain tapped the panes behind him. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Morning," he said softly. There was fatigue behind his voice. "Morning," she answered. They exchanged no further words. Too much hung unspoken between them. They met by the map room. Edward and a few trusted house staff awaited. The codex lay open, the ledger still on the table. Candles glowed, maps cast long shadows. The mood was one of quiet urgency and sharp edges. Lucien began, "We dispersed the attackers, but this tells us Bellwether still commands resources. Men under cloak, weapons, infiltration. He cannot be dismissed as a ghost any longer." Eleanor nodded. "We now must rebuild strength within and without. The house is wounded," Edward added. "I have found traces in the ledger pointing to other properties tied to Bellwether's network. Safe houses, hidden caches. If we can uproot those, his grip loosens. They worked through the morning, cross-referencing maps, cipher keys, old correspondences. Eleanor's eyes burned with concentration. The staff shifted nervously outside. Midday came with uneasy quiet. The kitchen smelled of roast fowl and herbs, but the normal hum of service was muted. Eleanor dined briefly with Lucian. Game pie, steamed greens, new bread, sour wine mellowed by time. She ate little, pressing the knife into her finger once and tasting copper. Lucian saw and touched her hand. "Be careful," he whispered. She nodded. After the meal, Eleanor walked the servant wing. She paused before the door to Mrs. Holcomb's chamber, standing in the corridor listening. A muffled sob. She slipped in quietly. Holcomb sat by her dresser, tears running, hands trembling. She looked up. "Miss Harrow," she whispered. Eleanor approached, kneeling. "You have spoken truth in public." "I cannot deny my part," Holcomb said. "He threatened my child. He promised death. I did not know whom else to believe." Eleanor's heart panged. She placed a hand on Holcomb's. "I know you feared, but your fear betrayed more than duty. It wounded trust." Holcomb wept. "I beg forgiveness." Eleanor rose. "I will decide your fate. But know this, your betrayal did not break me. It only revealed the cracks we neglected." She left quietly. Later that afternoon, Lucian beckoned Eleanor to the chapel crypt. The storm clouds outside built heavy. They descended behind St. Margaret's tapestry, down the spiral steps into the hidden chamber. The dagger ring codex lay as before. He handed her a leather-bound journal, one Edward had recovered in the ruins. Its pages held diary entries, encoded passages, fragments of Bellwether's plans. Eleanor opened carefully. One entry caught her breath. October 31st. The heir must cross path tonight. The walls whisper. Blood must awaken the gate. The servant's key is a mask. She will know too soon. She looked at Lucian. "You see how long this has lain. Bellwether predicted your rising, your boldness. He planted the betrayal inside, behind voices heard, smiles given." He touched her arm. "You know his methods now. He strikes where trust is deepest." She swallowed. "Then we fight there." They left the crypt and returned upward. By evening, the household was assembled again in the great hall. Storm winds rattled the windows. Eleanor rose, gown of midnight blue, hair pinned in austere coils. Lucian stood beside her, Edward behind. She addressed the staff with steady voice and clear eyes. "Last night's assault showed Bellwether's power. This house bled from within, but tonight we root the poison. I command that every door be locked, every corridor watched, every servant searched. Anyone hiding in darkness will face judgment." Her gaze rested on Kingsley and Holcomb, confined beyond screens. The staff shifted, fear in their eyes. She continued, "We will dine early, then we reconvene in the library. I will act, not with terror, but with justice." She sat, and the meal proceeded. Roast venison, new potatoes, braised cabbage, pear tart. The wine was deeper, darker, tasting of blood and iron. Conversation was subdued. Every glance felt loaded. At the end of the meal, with guests excused, Lucien escorted Eleanor to the library. The staff cleared. The fire was bright, the shelves heavy with books. Eleanor stood in front of the ledger, codex, cipher maps. She addressed the room and the unseen enemy beyond it. "Kingsley, Mrs. Holcomb, you will be brought before me." Guards allowed them forward under escort. Eleanor's voice did not tremble. She laid out evidence, ciphered entries, hidden passages, intercepted notes, coded instructions. The faces of those present blanched. She then reached into her bodice and drew a small key, a master key she had kept in secret. "This unlocks every passage in this house. I took it. I had to trust only myself." A hush fell. She glanced at Lucien. He nodded. Then Eleanor turned to Kingsley. "You betrayed me. You used the keys entrusted to you to assist Bellwether's schemes. You allowed him to bleed my house from within. What have you to say in your defense?" His lip quivered. He looked at her, then at Lucian, then at Edward, tears leaking. I was broken. He held power over me. He promised safety. My debts, my family. He threatened them." She nodded slowly. "Fear is a weapon often used by cowards. But you had a choice." She turned to Holcomb. "You, Mrs. Holcomb, you carried messages. You unlocked safes. You delivered whispers to Cloak and Dagger. Your complicity was willful." Holcomb wept. "I did it to protect my child. He forced me. I had no recourse." Eleanor sighed. "Your fear betrayed more than your duty, but your fear also came from love. I will weigh mercy and justice." She paused. "But there is no place for half-truths now. She turned to Edward and Lucian. "Seize every key, every map, every coded sheet. We purge the passageways, we bolt the secret doors, and we keep a nightly patrol." Guards led Kingsley and Holcombe away. The staff watched, shaken. Late that night, Eleanor visited the chapel crypt alone. The storm raged overhead. Lightning flashed through the small windows. She knelt before the altar, cloak drawn about her, candle in hand. The dagger and ring lay before her. She closed her eyes and whispered a vow. "I am heir of Whitcomb. I will safeguard its walls. I will not yield to shadows. Betrayal shall find no sanctuary here." She touched the signet ring. She felt her brother's presence. Footsteps echoed behind her. Lucien entered quietly. His coat was wet. Rain still dripped. He knelt beside her. "You are namesake of your house, Eleanor," he said softly, "and you stand now when most would fall." She leaned into him. "I will not break." He took her hand. "And I will stand with you." Lightning burst overhead. The crypt walls trembled. They rose and ascended together. The manor loomed in the storm, silent and watchful. The night was far from done. Whitcomb's walls had borne more than bricks. They had borne betrayal, but Eleanor would endure until every hidden voice was laid bare. Chapter 11. The Unmasked Betrayer. The night after the purge of traitors left Whitcomb restless. Rain hammered the windows, wind gusted down corridors, and shadows heaved across tapestry and stone. Eleanor awoke early before the servants, with a tautness in her chest. She dressed in a gown of deepest indigo, trimmed with a narrow band of silver thread, tracing the shape of the falcon's talon. Her hair was pinned high, the few strands loose and curling damply about her neck. She slid the signet ring onto a fine chain and tucked it beneath her bodice. She moved through the cold halls in soft slippers, hands folded. The air smelled of wet earth and old wood, touched with the smoke from dying embers. She paused at the portrait hall. The faces of Harrow's past watched her, silent. She touched a finger to the frame of her mother, whose eyes seemed to glint in the dim light. A soft murmur of regret passed through her mind. Then she turned onward. Downstairs she found Lucian by the hearth in the map room, studying the ledger and codex once more. The fire flickered across his angular features. His coat lay over the back of the chair, cravat loosened, sleeves rolled. The cut from the skirmish still lined his cheek, faintly crimson. He looked up. "You're awake early." "I couldn't rest," she said. "They betrayed from within. Tonight, I want the betrayer revealed, fully." He nodded. "We will." But cautious steps. Bellwether's hand lurks in deeper shadows. They spent the morning in plotting, marking who had keys, who had access, cross-referencing movements, ledger entries, cipher threads. Eleanor's mind flickered with every half-truth she had heard. She remembered the footman's shift too swift, the gardener's gloved hand trembling at dusk, the butler's pale gaze. Could any of them be the final mask? At midday, Eleanor took time to walk the gardens. The rain had eased to a drizzle. The grounds were sodden, paths wet, leaves shining black. She wore a cloak of dark green wool, hood drawn. She passed under the yew arch, where the air smelled of damp moss and earth. The secret gates lay hidden. The trail of betrayal seemed to trace in every puddle, every glint of metal. She paused at a broken statue base, and there, half buried, she found a scrap of paper edged with water, a cipher line matching the ledger. "Open gate, blood tie, serve the circle." Her heart pounded. She surged inside. She found Lucian and Edward assembling a small cadre of trusted staff, the head cook, stable master, housemaid Maris, and the guard captain. The room was tense. Candlelight glowed on map spool, on folded ledgers. Eleanor held up the cipher scrap. "This matches traitor ledger lines. Someone among you delivered it." Gasps ran. The cook, stout and grey-haired, paled. The stablemaster's hand clenched. Maris blinked hard. Lucian's voice cut in. "We test trust tonight. We guard corridors. We lock access. And at midnight, I will confront the betrayer in the great hall." Edward nodded. "I will marshal the household. All who wish to stand with Whitcomb lie behind my line." Eleanor's resolve hardened. So be it. Dinner that night was stark and tense. The great hall glowed with candlelight and shadows. Eleanor entered in a gown of black, embroidered with silver filigree. Lucian beside her in dark coat, face hardened but supportive. The staff filed in, glancing sideways at one another. The tension was palpable. Knife blades clicked against plates. Voices were low. The menu was deliberate. Hearty soup with root vegetables, roast venison with juniper, boiled greens, coarse bread, a tart of red currants. Each dish offered comfort, but the eyes with which they were served were cautious. Eleanor ate just enough. Between courses, she engaged servants in quiet talk, questions about tasks, corridors, spare keys, observing reactions. The cook's hand shook slightly as she handed gravy. Maris frowned when asked to close a side door. The butler steadied his tray with hard grip. Eleanor's pulse flickered at each nuance. After dinner she stood. "We will delay dessert till a final declaration." She paused. "At midnight the betrayer will come forth, by word or by force, or be unveiled." The staff nodded wearily. The hush closed in. They dispersed. In the kitchen, the cook wept softly. Maris washed dishes with trembling hands. In corridors, guards made slow patrols. Eleanor and Lucien moved through the hidden passages, sealing doors, checking locks, arranging lanterns. Midnight approached. In the great hall, torches flared, casting tall shadows. The staff were required to assemble, Kingsley and Mrs. Holcombe, in guarded space behind screens, not released, but placed in sight. The rest of the household stood in rows against walls, lanterns held high. Lucien and Edward flanked Eleanor at the dais. The codex and ledger lay on the table before them, exposed. Rain hissed beyond the windows. Thunder rumbled low. Eleanor's voice rang, "Let the night's truth show. Betrayer, present yourself now, no more concealment." Silence stretched, the weight of rooms and stones shivering. Then, from the back door, a footman's heavy gait, the figure emerged, face hooded, cloak damp. He strode forward. Lantern light glinted on a face, too familiar, too restrained. He drew back his hood. It was Gardner, the same man Eleanor had seen that morning. Gasps. The gardener's face was lined, eyes dark. His coat was muddy, gloves soaked. Eleanor's heart pounded. Lucien stepped forward. "Gardner, step forward." He halted near the table, lantern in hand. Eleanor's voice trembled but held firm. "You were seen near my wing at midnight. You delivered cipher lines. You accessed routes no Gardner should know." Gardner's eyes flickered. He coughed. "Miss Harrow, Lucien cut him off. "You have locks and keys you should not. You spoke with the traitor. You moved unseen corridors. Speak, or be unmasked by force." Gardner's shoulders shook. He glared at the staff behind him, faces hollow. He looked at Eleanor. "I did it for my children, for promise." He threatened their safety. I had no choice." A hush. Eleanor's chest ached. She stepped down from the dais. "Your sons did not ask for this. Your fear does not absolve betrayal." She turned to Lucien. "Check his apron, pockets, if he bears codex fragments or cipher slips." Guards searched Gardner. In his boot, they found a folded cipher sheet, matching ledger lines. In his apron, a scrap of the same handwriting as her brother's. Proof. Eleanor addressed everyone. "See how betrayal creeps in behind the mask of trust. We have wronged no one by truth," she paced to Gardner. "You will be confined tonight and tomorrow, judged by law and mercy." He bowed his head and was led away, silent but aware. The household watched, shaken. The tension released marginally, but the knowledge that one of their own betrayed them would not fade. Afterwards, Eleanor, Lucien, and Edward withdrew to the hidden corridor. Rain pounded. They pressed against stone. The betrayal had been unmasked, but Bellwether's shadow loomed. Eleanor's voice was low. "He used the gardener, someone invisible, someone we trust too little to watch." Lucien's eyes were grave. "We cleanse tonight. We patrol hidden passages. No one moves without watch." Edward traced a finger over cipher maps. "This reveals network nodes, even service paths. With Gardner's confession, we can cut many levers." Eleanor nodded. The storm outside seemed to echo their resolve. She remembered the scrap she found in the garden. She held it in her cloak. She pulled it forth. Lucien recognized the line. "It was planted to frame movement here. Draw out the betrayer." She inhaled sharply. "A trap within a trap." Lucien caught her arm. "You were wise to call confrontation tonight. We may have forced Bellwether's hand." They stood under torchlight, storm-thinned, the walls heavy with betrayal laid bare. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. In the late hours, Eleanor visited the hidden chamber beneath the chapel. The dagger and signet ring lay on the altar table. She touched the blade gently, cold, lethal, carried through betrayals. She placed the ring beside it. The codex lay open still, pages flickering in candlelight. The ledger sat closed. Lucien joined her, stepping from the shadows, lantern in hand. His face was hollow, silent, his presence quiet but protective. He took the dagger, then kissed the ring. His breath was soft. She turned to him. "We have the betrayer, but the war is not over." He nodded. "Bellwether remains. This victory is fragile." She laid her hand on his cheek. Rainlight flickered through the walls. Her voice, small but firm. "Then we stand. We rebuild trust. We guard the walls fiercely. Let no betrayal breathe here again." He held her, silent. The storm outside roared, as though applauding defiance. In the house where the masks were torn away, Eleanor stood in the flicker of truth, and the walls knew no betrayal could ever hide among her stone again. Chapter 12, The Last Gambit. A cold blue light crept across the lawn as dawn broke, the sky pale and brittle. The trees outside Whitcomb sighed under the weight of rain-soaked branches, and the air held a sharp electric promise. Inside, the halls were somber, the household on edge. Eleanor rose early before most would stir. She dressed in a gown of deep wine velvet, its bodice trimmed in silver filigree that caught faint glimmers of candlelight. The sleeves were tight at the forearm, flared at the wrist, practical but elegant. Her hair was braided and pinned into an intricate coif at the nape of her neck, jeweled pins glinting. Over it, she wore a cloak of charcoal wool, lined with fox fur. She drew the silver signet ring from its hidden place and slid it on her finger. It felt heavy with promise. In the dining room, the table was laid for the morning meal. Crusty loaves of rye and barley, soft rolls warm from the oven, bowls of sweet butter churned fresh, jellied quince preserves in a cut-glass dish, smoked trout with fresh parsley, a jug of cream, and teacups steaming with strong black tea. The scent of honey and fruit lingered alongside the smoke. Lucien entered behind her, dressed in dark tailcoat, white shirt, cravat loosely knotted, and breeches of black. His boots bore mud from last night's chase. The cut along his cheek was healing. A faint scar remained. He studied her, her gown, the ring, the set of her shoulders. She met his gaze squarely. "Your plan?" He glanced at the food, then away. "We hold the manor. Bellwether must come here. We draw him into the open." They ate together in quiet urgency, breaking only for small sips of cream-thickened tea, buttery rolls softened by jam. Eleanor tasted the sweetness sharply, life continuing even under threat. She felt the tension knot her stomach. After breakfast, Eleanor convened a council. Edward, Lucien, the guard captain, and her most trusted staff. In the map room, candlelight and morning mist drifting through windows, they deployed defense lines, sealed secret passages, repositioned guards, and studied the codex where Bellwether's network was mapped. Every exit, every hallway, every window was considered. Eleanor's mind churned. She changed into traveling clothes mid-morning, a tunic of forest green cloth over riding breeches, boots laced to mid-calf, and a light leather jerkin. She carried her dagger and the signet ring. Lucien accompanied her, gear strapped, pistols concealed, face grim. They walked the ramparts, inspected the gatehouse, closed trap doors, and fortified the weak points in the west wall. At midday, Eleanor retired to her solar to eat alone. A modest midday meal, oysters on the half-shell, dressed with lemon and black pepper, cucumber slices, crusty bread, a small glass of cold white wine. She dined by the window overlooking the orchard, the wind sighing over leaves, light flickering through branches. Her reflection in the glass looked haunted, resolved. She touched the ring, thought of her brother, the dagger beneath her skirts, the betrayals laid bare. Her hands trembled, then steadied. Lucien entered softly. He brought her a cup of strong broth with vegetables and tender meat. The aroma was warm. She accepted it, sipping carefully. He sat beside her, silent for a moment. "We hold until he storms," he said. She nodded. As twilight fell, staff were gathered in small groups. Guards stood vigilant at gates. Curtains were drawn. The manor became a fortress lit by torches and lanterns. Eleanor donned her velvet gown again, the wine-dark color folding around her, silver embroidery glinting in lamplight. Lucien's coat bore new creases. His face was drawn. Dinner was formal, a display of resolve. Roasted pheasant with truffle butter, glazed carrots, apple and pear compote, mashed parsnip, small loaves, and a decanter of robust red wine. The polished table shone with silver candlesticks, and the staff stood at attention, faces pale. Eleanor presided, speaking quietly to those near, encouraging, steely. Every glance and footstep was tense. She ate slowly, tasting the richness, while her mind measured each guest, each servant. Her eyes flicked to hidden corridors, half-lit doorways. After dinner, she dismissed the staff except for her closest, Edward, Lucienne, the guard captain, and 2 loyal housemaids. She led them into the gallery, where oil paintings glowed under lamplight. She spoke in soft tones. "Bellwether knows we unmasked Gardner. He will not wait. He will act tonight. We must be ready. I intend to draw him into the great hall, into the open, with no hiding places. We will force him to show himself to all." Edward and Lucienne nodded. The guard captain detailed men to each corridor, each doorway. The house became a web of watchers. She then retreated to the hidden crypt beneath the chapel. There, she gathered the dagger, the ring, the codex, cipher sheets. By starlight filtering through stone, she prayed, touched relics, reviewed plans. Lucienne joined her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Their closeness pressed with risks. He said softly, "No matter tonight, I stand with you." She turned to him. "We are one house now." Night settled thick and heavy. The storm returned, thunder rumbling, rain lashing windows. The manor's lights glowed like beacons in darkness. Whispers passed among guards. Doors closed. At the stroke of midnight, Eleanor descended to the great hall. The doors stood open, torches burning. The corridors beyond were dim. The staff stood in silent rows at the sides. Guards were posted. Lucienne and Edward flanked her. She held the dagger in one hand, ring in the other. She raised her voice. "Bellwether, if you come in shadows, come into the open. Show yourself. Let your lies and threat be faced by all." Silence swallowed the hall. Then, behind her, the hush of footsteps. The torches flickered. A hooded figure entered. Rainwater dripped from cloak. The figure stood in the torchlight and drew back his hood. The face was pale, gaunt, eyes cold and sharp. He was Bellwether, but his features were not unfamiliar. A man she had known in memory, molded by betrayal. Eleanor's throat tightened. He bowed slightly, voice low. "Miss Harrow, Captain Arden, so you call me out. Good." Lucienne moved forward. "Betrayer, reveal your face and purpose." Bellwether stepped closer. His cloak fell open. He bore no weapon strap visible. Blue coat, dark breeches, boots wet. His hair was damp. His eyes held fierce calm. He smiled thinly. "You saw Gardner, rightly. But he is but a pawn. The real betrayal is deeper." He looked at Eleanor, voice gentler. "You carry blood. Harrow's Arden, the line of claim. I sought that blood, your blood, as key, not your safety. You are not heir by accident. The codex, the ledger, they guided you." Eleanor's fingers tightened on dagger. She swallowed. "You plotted this from the beginning." He nodded. "I planted seeds of distrust. I embedded traitors. I whispered false promises. I watched from corridors, pulling strings." Lucienne ground his teeth. Edward's face flared. Bellwether raised a hand. "But you have unmasked me. And now the final move must be made." He stretched his arms. Guards appeared at back alleys. Black cloaks pressed against windows. He advanced. Eleanor drew her dagger, Lucienne his pistol. He paused 2 paces away, a charged moment, and then the battle. Steel echoed, cloaks rustled, torches flared. Bellwether lunged. Eleanor parried. Lucienne fired. The bullet struck stone behind him. Guards charged. Edward intercepted an attacker. The staff, some terrified, some brave, stepped aside. Eleanor ducked under a swing, pressed forward, dagger in hand. Bellwether's cloak whipped. His eyes burned. She aimed for his arm. He blocked. Sparks flew. In the fray, she glimpsed Gardner and Mrs. Holcomb, among the shadows, writhing. Betrayal, yes, but the heart of the network was here, and she would tear it out. She parried again. This time her blade caught his sleeve. The cloth tore. Bellwether staggered. Lucienne seized the moment and lunged, restraining him. Eleanor pressed forward, hand at his throat, dagger steady. Bellwether gasped. "You think you've won?" But the line was never yours alone. Eleanor's voice rang, steel in her tone. "The line is mine. The blood is mine. The house is mine." With one last push, she slashed across his chest. He staggered, fell to one knee, hissed. Guards moved in, shackles drawn. Lucienne grasped him. Edward stood guard. The hall fell silent. Rain beat the windows. Thunder crashed. Eleanor stood over him, dagger lowered but clenched, eyes blazing. The staff watched, horror and awe. She spoke. "Let this betrayal end tonight. May Whitcomb remember only this. Loyalties founded on truth, not shadow." They bound him in heavy cords. The network's heart lay captured. Later, Eleanor, Lucienne, Edward stood before the hearth in the drawing room. The fire was spent, embers glowing. The night hung heavy outside. She removed her cloak and gown, revealing the velvet beneath. singed in one hem. Lucian helped her. She touched the cut on his cheek, clean now but still pink, their faces close. Edward stood slightly apart, gazing at Bellwether's captive form beyond barred gates. Eleanor's voice soft. "We rebuilt this house tonight." Lucian's voice in her ear. "We did, but we guard forever." She leaned into him, he kissed her temple. They remained there, silent in victory, and the weight of what had been betrayed and reclaimed, and under Whitcomb's ancient stones, the final betrayal found blood tied to the truth, and Eleanor stood triumphant, though the scars would endure always. Chapter 13, After the Storm. The dawn, after Bellwether's capture, broke pale and tentative. The gardens, sodden and battered, lay mute beneath grey skies. Statues dripped with water, hedges bowed under drooping branches. A chill wind ran through the hedgerows, carrying the scent of wet stone and cold earth. Eleanor woke slowly, the memory of last night a mixture of triumph, exhaustion, and ache. Her arms felt leaden, her throat dry. She rose from the bedchamber where the moonlight still lingered in weak silver. She dressed deliberately, a gown of steel blue silk, its bodice embroidered with silver threads tracing falcons and roses. The sleeves fit snugly to her arms, the skirts flowing but heavy, ideal for movement. Her hair was loosened and braided half across her crown, loose tendrils framing her face. She clasped the signet ring over her heart, sliding it under folds of fabric. She crossed to the window and looked down on the courtyard. Guards paced by the gates. Bellwether's prisoners, Kingsley and Gardner, were led in chains to a side wing under heavy guard. The manor felt larger and yet more vulnerable than before. In the great hall, the breakfast was laid with quiet care. Buttered toast, freshly baked rolls, smoked bacon strips crisped at the edges, soft boiled eggs, porridge with honey, and bowls of seasonal fruit, blackberries, apples, pears. The aroma of baking, smoke, and honey hung in the morning air. Eleanor realized she was hungry, though part of her stomach trembled with tension. Lucienne entered, dressed in dark riding coat, waistcoat of forest green, breeches of deep charcoal, boots polished but showing mud from the yard. His hair, cropped close, framed his face. His eyes, steely and alert, met hers across the room. He nodded. They sat and ate together. Eleanor broke bread, smeared it with butter, tasted the sweetness of honey, teasing herself that life still had comfort. Lucienne ate bacon crisp, eggs runny, porridge thick. His hand brushed hers as he passed the butter dish, a subtle contact that carried more weight than either acknowledged. She met his eyes and found steadiness there. After breakfast, Eleanor convened in the library with Edward, Lucienne, the guard captain, and the head steward. The table was strewn with maps and the codex, its pages now annotated. They reviewed Bellwether's routes, network threads, safe houses, and codes. Overnight, the rain had seeped into corridors. Some doors had swelling wood. Eleanor assigned tasks: guard rotation, secret corridor sealing, intelligence gathering, interrogations, and watch for the final strand. Eleanor changed again mid-morning into travel leathers. A dark olive jerkin over linen shirt, breeches, boots strapped tight. She wore a light cloak that could fold over into a hood. Lucian joined her in the courtyard, where Edward waited. The air was crisp, the ground wet. Eleanor's cloak brushed the cold stone as she moved. Her hair was pinned, but a few tendrils curled around her face. Edward, too, wore riding gear, dark coat, trousers, boots with spurs. They rode out beyond the orchards, beyond the perimeter walls, following paths Bellwether had indicated on codex maps. The horses' leather tack trilled against the spray of dew. The scent of grass and moss filled the air. They arrived at a small ruin, a watchpost halfway down the hill, stone walls half collapsed, vines and ivy entwined. In the overgrowth, they discovered a hidden hatch in the ground, sealed. Eleanor touched the cold iron rings. Lucian pried. It opened. A staircase led below. They descended together, torchlight flickering, walls slick with moisture, echoing drips. The passage opened into a cellar full of crates, barrels, old trunks, Bellwether's cache. Among them were weapons, coded documents, maps, ledgers. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight of a leather satchel stamped with the falcon's talon crest. Lucian and Edward began cataloguing. Eleanor opened crates, powder, swords, pistols, secret seeding of corruption in neighboring lands, coded orders to traitors. Among papers, she found a letter in her brother's hand. "Bellwether writes your path. I hide your birth in cipher, so only truth may free you. Her heart shuddered. They loaded what they could into saddlebags. Eleanor paused over the letter. She tucked it close. Lucienne stood behind, hand at her shoulder. They climbed back. Rain began again. By evening they returned to Whitcomb. The manor, lit by torch and lantern, stood wary. Eleanor felt the weight of what lay ahead. Some reckoning, some final confrontation. Dinner was subdued: roasted fowl, root vegetables, steamed greens, hearty stew, dark bread, and apple pudding, with a drizzle of spice syrup. The staff and guards dined in quiet respect. The hush was respectful but taut. Eleanor presided, gown of deep plum silk, sleeves embroidered, hair pinned tightly. Her face held fear, exhaustion, resolve. Lucian sat across, offering glances of reassurance. Afterwards, Eleanor invited Kingsley, Gardner, and a few implicated servants, under guard, into the drawing-room. The fire glowed warm. She summoned them gently. Though the weight of betrayal hung thick, she spoke of trust, of house, of consequences. She offered mercy to those who fully confessed, loyalty to those who repented. Guarded confessions emerged. Kingsley admitted he had signed a secret oath with Bellwether in his youth, coerced by debts. Gardner confessed he carried messages through garden routes. Others spoke quietly. Eleanor listened. She weighed. She forgave some underservice, but banished others, dismissed them from Whitcomb with nothing but a cloak and portion. Late into the night, Eleanor retired to the chapel crypt alone. The candles flickered. The walls echoed. The dagger and signet ring lay before the altar. She knelt and prayed, not for vengeance, but for clarity, for peace. She thought of her mother, her brother, her guardian. She touched the ring, kissed it, whispered a vow. No more shadows, no more betrayal. Lucien stepped softly behind. He stood, silhouette against the faint light. She turned, and their eyes met. Rain leaked through a small shaft in stone. She rose. They walked upward together, hand in hand. The manor loomed above, gaunt and battered, yet still proud. Thunder rolled. The night still held dangers, but for this moment, Eleanor felt solid, a queen not of kingdoms, but of her own walls. In the dawn's fragile wash, Eleanor stood restored, her bloodline preserved, her walls defended, and her heart both burdened and unwavering. Chapter 14. Echoes in the Walls. Morning arrived, damp and grey, creeping over Whitcomb in slow light. The garden paths gleamed wet, hedges bowed under lingering dew, statues glistened as though shed tears from stone. Inside, the corridors felt hollow, as though the house itself were breathing, haunted by last night's storm. Eleanor awoke with the echo of steel and betrayal in her ears, memories that would not soften. She dressed in a gown of deep emerald green silk, its bodice embroidered in silver filigree, echoing the falcon's talon. The sleeves were tight to the wrist, but flared elegantly at the hands. Her hair was braided and coiled at the back, adorned with a small silver comb shaped like a leaf. Over it she wore a dark cloak of heavy wool, lined with fur at the collar. The ring rested in her palm as she fastened the clasp. Her reflection in the mirror was quiet and determined. In the dining room, breakfast was laid with care, fresh rolls still warm, thick slab butter, preserves of gooseberry and red currant in cut glass jars, soft cheese, oat cakes, poached eggs with white meat of trout from the fish pond, and a pot of strong tea infused with mint. The scent of sweet preserves mingled with bread and smoke. Eleanor ate with calm, tasting each flavor with quiet awareness. Lucien joined her, coat unbuttoned, cravat loose, his cheek faintly pallid from the scuffle. He ate sparingly, bread, butter, eggs, coffee black. Their eyes met across the table. A shared resolve passed between them. After breakfast, Eleanor assembled Edward, the guard captain, and trusted staff in the map room. The codex lay open, beneath it, maps of the estate and surrounding counties. Eleanor traced routes, marked known safe houses, and annotated ledger entries recovered from Bellwether's cache. "We must strike now before he regroups," Eleanor said. "We root out his holdings, disrupt his lines, and secure Whitcomb as a fortress from which we counterattack." Lucien nodded. "We have the evidence. We have the network, but we must move decisively." Edward pointed to a map. "I traced 2 properties not far, the old mill on the creek and a farmhouse near the river crossing. Bellwether may use these as way stations or fallback points." She tapped her finger. "We will raid them tonight. Split force. Lucien and Edward take the farmhouse. I lead the mill operation." They conferred the plans. Eleanor shifted into a lighter riding habit. Dark leather jerkin over cream linen, breeches, boots. She strapped her dagger and tucked the ring inside her vest. Lucien donned his riding coat, holsters concealed. At dusk, the teams divided. Eleanor rode through orchard paths to the old mill, wheels silent in broken channels, stone walls half collapsed. The wind moaned through water wheel bones. She dismounted, slipping through undergrowth with Maris, the housemaid loyal and strong. Maris wore a dark gown of travel cloth, her hair drawn back, eyes fierce. They entered the mill cautiously. Her torchlight flickered over crates, barrels, sacks of flour and grain, smuggling goods, hidden behind walls. Eleanor's heart pounded. She found a trapdoor under a sack. She pried it open. Below, a tunnel led to a cellar. In the cellar, crates of weapons, muskets, swords, powder kegs, lined the walls. Maps hung with routes, names, some from the ledger, evidence. Proof that Bellwether had pushed deeper. At the farmhouse, Edward and Lucien burst through the door. A startled guard raised a pistol. Lucien fired. The shot cracked against doorframe. Edward subdued the guard. Inside, they found rooms rigged for transfer, beds, pack animals, coded ledgers. They bound men, seized the ledger, and collected weapons. They raced back toward Whitcomb under storm-laden clouds, packs heavy, hearts taut. Dinner at Whitcomb was modest: stew of mutton and root vegetables, bread fresh from ovens, a salad of bitter greens and herbs, fresh water from the spring. The staff ate early while Eleanor, Lucien, and Edward dined privately. Eleanor tasted the stew, warm, rich, necessary. The bread was crusty, the greens crisp and bitter. The firelight flickered across walls and faces. She laid out the captured documents from both mill and farmhouse. The ledger matched Bellwether's cipher. The maps showed expansions toward villages and hidden corridors connected to Whitcomb's grounds. Lucien leaned forward. He underestimated you. He thought betrayal would be enough, but now we cut his lines. Edward spoke, voice tight. He will retaliate. Tonight or tomorrow, she nodded. Then we must extend our defenses. Guard all corridors, secret passages, every roof access. They finalized guard posts and patrols, sealed trapdoors, stationed watchers. Eleanor changed again into dark walking clothes with cloak and hood, walking corridor rounds with Lucien and guards, testing locks, doors, windows. Late evening, as the household slept uneasily, Eleanor walked the portrait hall. The faces watched. She paused before her mother, whose eyes in paint seemed to shimmer. She whispered, "I protect this house now." Lucien appeared behind her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She did not startle. His breath was warm. She leaned into him. "We fight again tomorrow," he said softly. She nodded. "And we endure." They passed into the hallway, patrolling in silence. Night deepened. Rain fell in sheets. The mansion groaned under gusts. Doors rattled. In corridors, lanterns glowed dim. Suddenly a scream rang. Guards sprang. Eleanor and Lucien raced toward the sound. It came from the east wing. They burst into a chamber. Maris, the loyal maid, stood frozen. The window was smashed, curtains torn. A cloaked figure fled down the corridor. Lucien shouted. Eleanor gave chase. The dark hall swallowed them. The assassin darted across side passage. She pursued, cloak flapping, boots echoing. In the gloom, she glimpsed a blade raised. Lucien tackled the attacker. Steel clashed. The figure struggled. She rushed in with dagger drawn. The blade caught the ground. Lucien pinned the figure. Eleanor's torch glowed on hooded face. The hood fell. The butler's face, cold, pale, shock, betrayal. The butler's eyes wide. She stood frozen. Lucien held him pinned. "Why?" Eleanor asked, voice broken. He spat. "Bellwether threatened me. He held my daughter's safety. I had no choice." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She stepped closer. The butler blinked, shame and fear in his eyes. She drew a line. "Your betrayal cuts the heart of this house." She motioned guards. "Take him away." As they led him off, Eleanor's knees trembled. Lucien steadied her. In the library later, they confronted the traitors, Gardner, Kingsley, Holcomb, and the butler, each standing under guard. Eleanor addressed them all. She spoke of broken trust, of bloodlines, of protection and duty. She offered mercy to those who fully confessed and vowed service. Others would be banished. The house wept. By dawn, the betrayers were confined in the prison wing. The household gathered quietly to witness the renewal of oaths. Eleanor, in gown of pale grey satin edged with silver, stood at the dais beside Lucien, Edward behind. The staff swore fealty anew, keys surrendered, secrets confessed. Food followed, a repast of game bird, fresh greens, sweet cakes, honeyed wine. The taste was bittersweet. Comfort after storm. Eleanor broke bread, passed pastries. The staff ate with trembling gratitude. Afterward, Eleanor retreated to the crypt. She knelt before the altar. The dagger and ring were laid. She clasped the ring, whispered names, her mother, brother, guardian. The storm had passed, but thunder still murmured in distant hills. Lucian entered softly. He knelt beside her. "Bellwether's web is torn," he said. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "But his shadow lingers." He took her hand. Together, we walked forward. Lightning flickered through the small window above the altar, illuminating the crypt with stark white. The house above slept uneasy, but Whitcomb's walls held. When betrayal reigned in, Eleanor's resolve became the bedrock, and in that dawn she found that truth was not fragile, but the sharpest sword. Chapter 15. The Final Reckoning. Light crept grey across Whitcomb's battlements, filtering through narrow windows like dust motes stirred awake. The air felt brittle, as though the walls themselves held their breath in expectation. Eleanor awoke with a soft start, the memory of last night's struggle, and the taste of steel and betrayal lingering on her tongue. Her limbs ached. Her heart was heavy with purpose. She rose quietly, slipping from beneath her sheets to stand before the tall mirror in her dressing room. On the small dressing table lay the silk gown she had planned to wear, inky midnight blue, lined with silver thread, tracing falcons in flight. She touched it with trembling fingers, then turned and instead chose a more practical dress beneath, a bodice of deep charcoal with fine embroidery, sleeves narrow and fitted, the skirt heavy but cut to allow movement. Over it, she drew on a cloak of thick velvet, lined in dark sable, the hood pulled low. Her hair she braided tightly and pinned into a low coif, a few loose strands framing her face. Around her finger, beneath folds of fabric, she wore the silver signet ring. She paused before the mirror, steadying her breath. A warrior's face stared back, scarred, resolved, unbowed. She descended to the great hall. The table was set with sober purpose, thick slices of roast beef glazed with shallot and herb, honeyed root vegetables, braised cabbage with butter, crisped potatoes, warm loaves of crusty bread, and a sweet pudding of pear, almond, and a drizzle of syrup. The aroma of meat, butter, and spice filled the high-ceilinged hall. The staff moved about in hushed motions. The flicker of torchlight cast long, shifting shadows. Eleanor entered wearing her cloak, hood drawn back, the silver embroidery on her bodice catching torchlight. She looked every inch the mistress of Whitcomb, strong, measured, but carrying lines of trouble in her eyes. Lucian followed in a dark coat, waistcoat of forest green, cravat loosely knotted, breeches of charcoal. His garb spoke of readiness, not ceremony. His cheek was faintly pinked from last night's scuffle. His eyes were alert and steady. As Eleanor passed down the table, the staff bowed their heads. The tension in the room was taut but respectful. They dined solemnly. Eleanor tasted each dish slowly, the beef tender, the vegetables sweet, the potatoes crisp. She drank wine dark and full-bodied, savoring its depth. She observed faces across the table, guards, steadfast, shut-jawed, loyal servants, anxious but hopeful. Edward beside her, resolute. She offered quiet words, nods, strength. After the meal, the great hall stood empty. Guards had been posted, corridors secured, torches burning bright. Eleanor led Lucian and Edward toward the chapel crypt, down hidden stairs, through corridors damp with stone and echo. The air chilled, torches flickered against cold walls. The relics lay before them, dagger, signet, codex, ledger. Thought weighed heavy in the silence. Steps echoed behind, Bellwether's voice, smooth, low, a flicker of torchlight. He emerged, clad in deep cloak, face pale but fierce. His guards followed. He stepped forward, the glare of torchlight on his features, showing all the lines of ambition and cruelty. "Miss Harrow, Captain Arden, Edward, you summoned me into the open, into the house you call home. Very well." His cloak dropped. Beneath, a coat of dark wool, buttons of tarnished silver. His shirt clung damp to his chest. His eyes burned. Lucian drew a pistol. Edward and guards closed on him. Eleanor stepped forward, dagger in hand. The final confrontation began. Steel sang, torches flared. The stone walls rang with clash and cry. Bellwether lunged. Eleanor met him blade against blade. He twisted, swung again. She parried, struck. Guards surged, separated them. Lucien fired. The shot cracked, striking stone. Edward intervened, pushing aside an attacker, stepping into the fray. Eleanor ducked under a slash, dagger flashing. Midnight Cloak fell. Blood glinted. She staggered, caught herself. Bellwether pressed forward, smirk twisting his face. Then Lucian lunged, grappling him. Eleanor, recovering, aimed for flank. She stabbed. Bellwether gasped, staggering. His cloak caught the edge of the altar table. He tripped. Guards seized him. Eleanor, dagger trembling, stood above him. The hall hushed. Rain dripped from roof cracks. Her chest heaved. He lay bound, torchlight dancing on his pale face. She spoke. "Your web ends here. No more betrayals, no more shadows in my house." Bellwether's lips curved. "You may kill me, but you cannot kill what I am." His voice rasped. Edward stepped forward. "Your schemes fall with you." Guards secured him. Eleanor dropped her dagger. In the hush, thunder rolled far away. With dawn, Whitcomb stirred again. They led Bellwether through the court to the prison wing. The household watched in silent groans. Eleanor, cloaked in forest velvet, walked beside Lucienne and Edward. She felt the weight of every eye upon her. The gates closed behind them, the guards on watch. They returned to the great hall, where a solemn breakfast was laid. Porridge, fresh bread, honey, boiled eggs, trout from the pond, and gentle tea. The aromas felt healing. Eleanor took a seat at the head, her cloak set aside. She tasted bread and fish. The flavors were plain but sustaining. The staff ate quietly, offering glances of cautious relief. After breakfast, Eleanor held a tribunal of sorts. She addressed the household. "Bellwether is confined. His betrayals recorded in ledger and codex. Yet a house must heal. Trust must be rebuilt. Today, I release those who truly repent to serve anew. Those beyond redemption shall leave Whitcomb forever." She read confessions from ledger entries, assigned penances, redistributed keys, changed locks, sealed secret passages, appointed new guards. The atmosphere was solemn, but the first breaths of renewal stirred. Later she walked with Lucian and Edward through the footprinted gardens, the drizzle damp on grass. She wore her cloak, boots soft on gravel. The scent of earth and moss filled her lungs. She paused by the ancient oak, leaned against it, face to rain, feeling the pulse of the land. Lucian approached softly. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She turned, eyes glistening. "You made this house yours, Eleanor," he said, "through fire, betrayal, and steel. It stands because you stayed." She touched his cheek. "I could not have done it without you." He kissed her brow softly. Their closeness felt earned, fragile, in the quiet dawn. At dusk they returned to the chapel crypt. The relics lay as before. Eleanor donned the dagger, placed the signet ring on her finger, touched the codex. She spoke aloud a vow. "By blood, by truth, by the walls of Whitcomb, I bind betrayal no more." Lucian stood beside her, Edward behind. Outside, the manor glowed in torchlight. They left the crypt together, ascending to halls renewed. The storm had passed. The house would remember this night. At the end of storms and shadows, Eleanor stood in the light of her own making, and Whitcomb breathed free again. Chapter 16. The New Covenant. The morning after Bellwether's fall was calm in its lightness, but heavy in expectation. Mist drifted across the lawns, lifting slowly as the sun showed a pale silver face. Inside Whitcomb, the curtains were drawn aside. The high windows let in dew-washed air. The house smelled of damp stone, fresh linen, and possibility. Eleanor rose early. She dressed in a gown of pale, dove-grey silk, with a bodice trimmed in subtle silver embroidery, echoing falcon wings. The sleeves were cut close, tapering to narrow lace cuffs. Over the gown she wore a light cloak of soft blue wool, lined with sable fur, practical but dignified. Her hair, unpinned since the night, was brushed loose, waves falling over her shoulders, caught here and there with small silver pins. The signet ring rested on her finger, cold and comforting. She paused before her mirror, steadying her breath. The woman gazing back carried scars, but also resolve. She walked to the breakfast hall. The table was laid with care, flaky croissants, warm rolls, butter churned fresh, herb-stewed mushrooms, smoked tongue, thinly sliced, boiled eggs, fresh fruit, pears, grapes, plums, and tea scented with mint and a twist of lemon. The aroma of baking and toast mingled with the soft clink of silverware. She broke bread, tasting the butter, the sweet fruit. She looked up to see Lucien enter, dressed in a coat of deep navy with silver buttons, a waistcoat in emerald green, crisp white shirt, cravat loosely knotted. His hair still had damp curls at the temples. His cheeks were clearer now, healing lines softened. They ate together, mostly in silence, letting the quiet mornings settle around them. He offered a gentle smile when their eyes met. The staff moved in hushed reverence. The tension of betrayal still lingered, but hope had begun to stir. After breakfast, Eleanor convened the hall in the great room. The staff, guards, loyal servants, all assembled under torchlight and pale sun. She stood before them, in her grey gown, cloak folded, ring glinting. Lucian and Edward flanked her, guards behind. She addressed them. "Yesterday we endured betrayal. Today we begin the covenant of renewal. Whitcomb will stand on truth, not deception. Those who choose loyalty shall be restored. Those who cannot stand with light shall depart." She named staff by name, some to be reinstated to trusted station, others dismissed with a purse care and an honourable send-off, so that bitterness would not stain the walls. She offered a feast at dusk to celebrate unity, to taste peace for a moment before vigilance resumed. When the meeting dispersed, Eleanor and Lucian retreated to the map room. Together with Edward, they plotted out how to secure the estate permanently. New watchtowers, reinforcing gates, sealing old passages, building safe rooms and forging alliances with neighbouring lords, reticent to be drawn into Bellwether's schemes. Eleanor changed into riding gear, sturdy boots, breeches, a jerkin of forest green leather, shirt of cream linen, over it a cloak of slate wool. Lucien dressed similarly. They rode out into the lower fields, touring walls, checking defences, inspecting weak patches where vines or old stone might give access. Eleanor's cloak brushed the grasses. Her hair escaped and caught the wind. Her gloves bore smudges of soil as she pressed hands to stone walls to test their strength. By midday they returned. Eleanor ordered a light midday meal in her solar, cold quail wrapped in herbs, crisp salad, fresh bread, cheese, fruit. The sun streamed in through tall windows. Dust motes danced. She ate slowly, feeling nourishment in every bite, pausing sometimes to look out at the grounds being repaired. Lucien sat across, offering wine, encouragement. He watched her, eyes steady. After the meal, Eleanor walked the corridors, greeting servants with kindness, offering words of reassurance, asking about their families, rebuilding trust. She stopped before the steward's office, where a new ledger was being drafted. Keys returned, locks handed over anew. She laid a hand gently on the shoulder of a loyal clerk, promising fairness. Late afternoon she changed again for the feast. Gown of soft moss, green silk, bodice bodied with embroidery and silver thread, long skirts sweeping. Over that, a cloak of deep emerald velvet lined in satin. Her hair was loosely pinned, strands framing her face. She wore the signet ring proudly. Lucien wore a coat of midnight black, waistcoat of forest green, his cravat neatly tied, boots polished. At dusk, the courtyard was lit by torches. Tables were arranged in a courtyard hall under awnings, boughs overhead, lanterns hung in branches. The feast began. Roasted venison glazed with juniper and honey, root vegetables roasted with rosemary, buttery potatoes, fresh bread, bowls of winter squash soup, salad of wild greens with vinaigrette, apple pear tart with almond cream, wine, red and white. The smells rose, honey, roast, spice, smoke. The staff sat among guests. The bond of rebuilding stretched across the table. Eleanor welcomed everyone, stood at her place, carved meat, passed bread, poured wine. She thanked loyal services, acknowledged sorrows, pledged protection. The mood was sober but warm, laughter cautious, smiles careful but hope present. Lucien watched her, pride, grief, love in his eyes. When plates were cleared, he raised a toast. To the future. Whitcomb renewed, its walls stronger, its people steadfast. The staff raised glasses. Eleanor drank, tasting wine rich and warm. The moment hung golden. After the feast, lanterns lit corridors. Eleanor walked with Lucian in the gardens under stars. She wore her cloak over her gown. He walked beside her in coat and boots. The night air was cool. They paused by a fountain. She touched the water's surface, ripples. He took her hand. "Tonight we rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow rebuilding continues. The final threat may yet come, but we stand ready." She leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder. They remained in quiet, lantern glow surrounding, stars overhead, the scent of autumn in the air. Later, in her chamber, Eleanor wrote letters to neighbouring lords, pledging alliance and warning of Bellwether's influence. To her guardian in Geneva, telling him of trials and triumphs, and to Edward, her brother, forged new bond. She wore a simple silk nightshift, braided hair loose, rings strapped by her pillow. Lucien entered later, carrying wine and small sweet cakes. He poured, handed her a glass. She sipped, the warmth a balm. He knelt beside her. They shared quiet words, soft touches, reassurance. The scars of betrayal remained, but they leaned on each other. Outside, Whitcomb sleeps ready. The walls hold story now of endurance, not betrayal. The dawn will come, new chapters await, and in the hush after storms, Eleanor stood at the heart of Whitcomb, its walls mended, its promise renewed, and its future reclaiming light. Chapter 17, Shadows of the Crown. The morning air was crisp and clear as Eleanor stood on the terrace overlooking Whitcomb's gardens. Mist curled low across the hedges. The dew gleamed on rose bushes and stone paths. A pale sun lit the east sky, its gold soft against grey walls. Eleanor wore a travelling gown of dove-grey silk, the bodice trimmed in dove feather embroidery, in pale silver thread. The sleeves were narrow, with small pleats at the wrist. The skirt fell straight, but allowed ease of movement. Over that she drew a dark navy riding cloak, lined in pale silk, clasped at her throat with the silver falcon's talon insignia. Her hair was swept back into a braided knot. A few loose strands framed her face. Around her neck, hidden under folds, the silver signet ring rested. She breathed in the morning chill, tasting promise and tension. Lucian stood behind her, wearing a coat of deep charcoal wool with silver buttons, a forest green waistcoat beneath, crisp white shirt, and breeches of midnight blue. His boots were polished but bore light scuffs from recent patrols. The cut of his coat held shoulders square. His hair, cropped, had damp curls about the temple. He watched Eleanor with quiet pride. They dined early in the solar, hot scones, fresh butter, poached eggs, mushrooms in cream sauce, a salad of bitter greens and fresh herbs, and a pot of tea, fragrant with bergamot. The scent of butter and earth and tea wove through the room. Eleanor ate slowly, tasting each element, letting things settle. Lucien poured tea, held the pot lightly, and offered a refill. Their fingers brushed. Outside, servants moved, curtains swayed, and the house felt poised. Shortly thereafter, a carriage arrived from the East Road. Eleanor dressed for the journey. She changed into a fine gown of cerulean silk, trimmed with silver filigree, sleeves embroidered with falcon motifs. Her hair was pinned high, pearls glinting. She wore gloves of soft kid leather. Lucien, similarly, donned his best riding attire. Dark coat, silver buttons gleaming, waistcoat of emerald, cravat tied with care. They paused a last moment at the door, Eleanor taking a steadying breath at the weight of this journey. Lucien touched her hand. "You carry Whitcomb's strength with you," he murmured. She nodded and climbed into the carriage, journeying toward Farbridge Hall for the gathering of lords, where she would present her case for independent authority, using the evidence of Bellwether's network to back her rule. The roads to Farbridge were damp, the forest edges shadowed, the carriage wheels whispering on wet earth. Eleanor watched the countryside slide past. Hedgerows, fields, distant hills. She felt the ring's weight, the burden of legacy. Lucian sat opposite, cloak drawn, posture alert. The ride was silent but loaded. At midday they stopped at an inn for luncheon. Eleanor disembarked into the common room, a long wooden table strewn with pewter plates and a central hearth. The air smelled of roasting meats, wood smoke, and fresh bread. They were served a simple but hearty meal: mutton stew with root vegetables, coarse bread, cheese, apples and pears, and ale. Eleanor tasted the tender meat. The pull of potatoes softened. Lucien drank ale, hands warm around the mug. The staff eyed them respectfully. They ate quickly but with composure, listening to local gossip, some murmur of Bellwether's reach beyond their lands. Eleanor's jaw hardened at each whispered implication. They resumed their journey, the sun edging toward afternoon, light waning. At Farbridge Hall they arrived as dusk crept. The hall loomed, stone turrets, high gables, torchlight flickering in windows. Eleanor stepped from the carriage into the courtyard, servants awaiting, archers posted. She walked the stone path in her cerulean gown, cloak trailing, hair pinned, gloves off now. Lucien accompanied her in formal walking coat. Inside, the great hall was set for assembly. Long tables lined with heavy cloths, silver candelabras, heraldic banners, and tapestries lining stone walls. The guests, lords and ladies, gathered clad in silk, velvet brocade, gowns of deep crimson, blue gold, the men in tailored doublets, cloaks, polished boots. The air smelled of roasting fowl, spiced meats, wine, wood smoke. Eleanor entered with Lucian by her side. All eyes turned. She felt the weight of scrutiny. The hush dropped. She was escorted to a dais. She curtsied, then stood in full view. Cerulean sunlight dress, cloak, ring shining faintly. A lord rose, addressing the assembly. "We are assembled in this hall to hear the claims of Whitcomb. Lady Eleanor, you may speak." She bowed. Then she spoke with voice steady and clear. "Lords and ladies of far lands, I stand before you not merely as mistress of Whitcomb, but as its heir, its defender, and its voice. For too long, my house was assailed by a hidden threat, Bellwether's network, betrayals from within, corridors compromised, loyalties sold. But I have revealed the web, secured my walls, and purified my household. Now I come before you with evidence, the ledger, the codex, safe houses, traitorous maps, and ask not for charity, but recognition, that Whitcomb be acknowledged as sovereign in its own right, that its agreements be honored, that its people be heard." She paused, letting her words settle. Torches glowed, tapestries still, the assembly whispered. A murmur ran, then she unrolled the ledger, the codex pages, maps, cipher sheets. Lucienne and Edward stood by, guards behind. The lords leaned forward, eyes flicking. One lord, Viscount Marlowe, spoke. "These are bold claims. But you bring evidence, and you bring courage. Yet how do we trust you after night's betrayal?" Eleanor steadied voice. "By showing truth in daylight, by punishing betrayal, restoring loyalty, by building alliances, not dominion, by proving that Whitcomb's walls shall protect, not enchain." A pause. A noblewoman, Lady Cressida, stood. Gown of emerald, fine lace, hair coiled. "If your claims are valid, you should lead in council with us, not stand alone." The hall shifted, some nodded, others looked skeptical. The assembly debated long into night, alliances, trade rights, mutual defense. Eleanor answered questions with clarity. Lucian provided backup. Edward offered maps and strategy. The food served between debates: roast partridge, spiced game pie, root vegetables glazed, fresh bread, cheese, fruit tarts, wine. The aroma and warmth steadied nerves. By midnight, a vote was called. The lords raised hands. One by one, Whitcomb's claim was approved. Bound agreements were drafted. Eleanor's heart flared. Recognition earned. The hall broke into muted applause. Eleanor bowed, tears in her eyes, Lucienne at her side. Returning home, the night road felt softer. The carriage moved slowly. Eleanor leaned into Lucian. She felt weight lifted. That night, at Whitcomb, a banquet was held in her honor. Venison roast, vegetables, sweet pudding, wine lined the tables. The staff stood bold. The house glowed. Eleanor entered in a new gown, ivory silk embroidered in silver falcon motifs, sleeves delicate, train sweeping. Her hair was braided with pearls. Lucienne accompanied her in formal dark coat, waistcoat of emerald green. They walked through the banquet, receiving nods, gratitude, hope. She tasted roast meat, crisp vegetables, bread, sweet wine, feeling home in her bones. Later, in private, Eleanor and Lucienne sat by firelight in the library. She removed her cloak, smoothing the ivory gown's folds. He removed his coat, sits near. The fire danced across their faces. The ring, dagger, codex lay on the table. She reached for Lucien's hand. He took it. Silence passed. She said softly, "You believed in me when shadows pressed. You stood with me when walls cracked." He kissed her hand. "And I always will." She leaned forward, touching his cheek. The world beyond faded. They sat in quiet, broken and whole, past betrayal and victory. In the dawn of new alliances and ancient walls, Eleanor stood not only as mistress of Whitcomb, but as its true crown, and her name would echo beyond stone, blood, and time. Chapter 18. The Falcon's Flight. The morning air beyond Whitcomb felt sharper, as though the land itself had taken a new breath. The gardens, washed by storm, glimmered in pale sunlight. Wet petals drooped, dewy vines pulled heavy, birds burst into song among hedgerows. The manor stirred with new energy, corridors opened, curtains drawn, lanterns lit. The echo of restored order flowed in every corridor. Eleanor awoke early. She stood in her bedchamber, the dawn's pale light filtering across her silk dresses. Today she chose a gown of soft teal silk with subtle silver embroidery along the neckline and sleeves that fitted snugly to her wrists before flaring slightly. Over it she wore a cloak of deep forest green velvet, clasped with the falcon's talon insignia in silver. Her hair was braided high, pinned with small pearls, a few tendrils loose about her brow. She slipped on soft riding boots and tucked the signet ring inside her cloak near her heart. She paused before the mirror, her expression measured. The stakes remained high, but hope had returned. In the great hall, the breakfast table gleamed. Fresh bread warmed in baskets, golden butter churned nearby, preserves of strawberry and quince in cut-glass pots, bowls of creamy porridge, smoked ham, soft cheese, boiled eggs. Tea scented lightly with mint waited. Eleanor broke bread, tasted ham, poured tea. Lucien entered behind her in a deep navy coat, waistcoat of moss, crisp white shirt, dark breeches, boots shining. His face appeared calmer now, though his eyes still carried vigilance. Their hands brushed as he accepted his cup. The staff watched quietly, relief and admiration in their faces. They dined in companionable silence as whispers moved through the hall. Neighbouring lords sending envoys, markets reopening, the name of Whitcomb spoken with cautious respect. The air felt pregnant with new alliances. After the meal, Eleanor gathered Edward, Lucien, the guard captain, and trusted retainers in the map room. The codex lay open, maps spread. She proposed the next move, building a southern outpost to guard against Bellwether's potential return, reinforcing borders, forging marriage treaties. She laid out plans for an alliance with Lord Marlowe, who had supported her claim. Lucien pointed out weak spots in terrain. Edward annotated supply lines. The captain assigned detachments. They divided tasks, building, diplomacy, defense. Eleanor changed mid-afternoon into travel garb, leather jerkin over linen shirt, sturdy breeches, boots, cloak. The new outpost site lay in rolling downs to the south. They rode out together, horse-tack creaking, the wind stirring cloaks, the scent of wet grass and soil all around. Eleanor's cloak whipped, the silver lining peaked. Lucien rode beside her, steady, eyes on horizon. They arrived at a modest ruin, a watchtower shell, doorless, wall half collapsed. Ivy trailed over stone. Eleanor dismounted. Her boots sank in mud. She touched the stone, feeling weight and age. She led Lucien and Edward into ruins. Inside, they found remnants, old arrow slits, latrine chutes, foundation trenches. Edward spread maps. They measured, marked zones for rebuild, wall reinforcement, gate placement, signal towers. Eleanor's cloak hung damp, her hair curled slightly at her neck. She knelt to test stones, brushed away moss, judged integrity. Lucien stood behind her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up, nodded. She rose, wiping her skirts. They made their plan. Fortify this tower, create supply lines, garrison troops loyal to Whitcomb. They stayed until dusk, riding back to the manor as dusk glowed. Back in the manor, staff were preparing a feast. Eleanor changed into an evening gown of soft, silver-blue velvet, sleeves embroidered in tiny falcon motifs, neck edged with pearls. Her cloak of velvet green was cast aside. Her hair was unpinned, curls falling softly. Lucien wore his dark coat, vest of emerald green, cravat neatly tied, boots polished. The feast was a celebration of progress. Roast pheasant stuffed with herbs, glazed root vegetables, buttered peas, fresh bread, a salad of mixed greens and herbs, apple pear tart, spiced wine. The aroma of roast and spice filled the hall. The staff attended with renewed spirit. Eleanor presided with calm grace, offering food, listening to laughter, to hopeful conversation. After dessert, Eleanor invited a few key lords who had come for alliance discussions into the drawing room. The room glowed by firelight. She wore a lighter shawl, pearls catching flame. She conversed with grace, answering questions about Whitcomb's future, admitting scars and affirming loyalty. She and Lucien stood side by side, their partnership visible. Later that night, Eleanor and Lucien walked the ramparts. She wore her cloak again over the gown, boots echoing on stone walkways. The wind blew across fields. She looked out over the land. The moon was pale. Lucien joined and slipped his arm around her. She leaned into him. He said softly, "You are building more than stone, Eleanor. You build trust, legacy." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I hope I deserve it." The manor slept beneath them, safe for now, yet the falcon's flight must continue, ever watchful, ever ready. Chapter 19, Fires in the Courtyard. The night air crackled as though loaded with electricity. An omen Eleanor sensed before the first scream. The moon hung unseen, veiled behind low clouds. The courtyard lanterns glowed dim through mist. Shadows pooled at corners. Rain had begun as a drizzle. Now thick droplets fell, pattering on stone. Eleanor awoke in her chamber with a whispering roar. The sounds were distant but unmistakable. Shouts, metal crashing, anguished cries. Her heart thundered. She dashed from the bed, shedding her sleeping shift, and donned her battle cloak, the same dark velvet cloak with silver lining she had worn in earlier battles, over a fitted underdress of slate linen and leather jerkin. Her hair, pinned from the night before, unraveled in damp curls. She strapped her dagger, slipped into boots, and moved through the corridors, cloak trailing, silhouette sharp in torchlight. In the hall, Lucian intercepted her. He wore dark leather and coat, sleeves bunched, a pistol in one hand. His face was pale under torchlight, brows tight. "They've breached the north gate," he rasped. "Guards falter." She nodded, cold focus in her eyes. Together they hurried toward the courtyard entrance, joining guard clusters in armor. The courtyard was chaos. Gates lay broken, guards fallen or retreating, cloaked attackers streaming in with firebrands, weapons drawn, flames licked wooden barriers, spreading fast. A torch set a gate hinge ablaze. The stone floor was slick with rain and blood. Eleanor's cloak whipped behind her, her underdress damp. She gripped her dagger, stepping forward into battle. A soldier fell beside her. She caught his arm, dragged him out of harm's way. Guards rallied behind her shield. Lucian opened fire from a parapet. Eleanor lunged into the crowd. Steel flashed. A blade nearly struck her side. She twisted, parried, then thrust. The attacker crumpled. Her breathing was ragged. Rain stung. A second wave of attackers emerged from a hidden side passage. They scaled walls, dropped into the courtyard. Eleanor faced one near the burnt gate. His breathing ragged, cloak soaked. She struck at his wrist. He swung. She dodged, then brought dagger to his throat. He gasped, dropped weapon. She held him with lethal poise. Behind, Lucian and the guards subdued others. Then a scream rang from the east wall. Fire had jumped to ivy, spreading. The courtyard gate was again threatened. Lucian shouted orders. Eleanor surged to the east flank, finding a cluster of attackers, setting fire to the archway. She waded through smoke and flame, striking, countering, guiding guards. Her cloak caught embers. She yanked it away, hair tangling across her face. One attacker pierced past guards and lunged at her guard, the captain. Without thought, Eleanor intervened. Her blade intercepted the swing. Metal rang. The man fell, chest cut. The guard captain caught his breath, injured but alive. Eleanor steadied him, eyes wild. Across the courtyard, Edward led a flank, driving attackers back toward the gate. Torches flared, sparks drifting upward. The air smelled of smoke, wet stone, fear. Rain hammered. After long minutes, the attackers retreated. Backs broken, morale shaken. Guards slammed, gates closed, chains rattling. The courtyard lay battered. Broken wood, fallen torches, scorched gate, strewn weapons, wounded bodies. Eleanor stood, cloak and hair singed, face wet with rain and sweat. Dagger stained, she gasped for breath. Lucian approached, arm raised, sword at rest. Edward and guard captain flanked. The staff peeked from behind stone columns, eyes brimming. She dropped her dagger, knees weakened. Lucian caught her. He laid a hand on her arm. She swallowed. The battle, but more, the betrayal underlying it, had carried a greater price than she could count. They retreated into the hall. Guards conducted the wounded, men and women, servants who had taken weapons to defend home. Eleanor, her gown soaked from beneath the cloak, moved among them, offering water, words, reassurance. She pressed cool cloths to burns, bound wounds, whispered comfort. She knelt beside a young stable boy who had caught a glancing slash. She held his hand. He dared a faint smile. She answered with steady but broken solace. Later, in the great hall repurposed as infirmary, torches, lanterns, and candlelight glowed across rows of stretchered bodies. The air smelled of blood, herbs, bandages. Eleanor moved, oversight and solace both. She visited each wounded guard, each faithful servant. She paused by one of her closest maids, bandaged arm bleeding. The girl whispered, "Lady Eleanor saved me." Eleanor's throat tightened. She clasped her hand. Lucian beside her watched, pain behind his eyes. After rounds, Eleanor withdrew to her solar. She slipped off her cloak, damp and ruined. Her gown beneath remained, damp-stained, cut in hem. She removed her boots. Her feet were scraped and bruised. She cradled the signet ring in her palm, finger trembling. She touched her wounds, the sting, the ache. She realized the cost. Dinner was postponed. Instead, the kitchen prepared a supper for the wounded and defenders. Hearty stew of venison and root vegetables, crusty bread, cheese, sweet pudding of apples and nuts, and bowls of hot broth. The scent was warm and healing. Meat, herbs, smoke. Eleanor partook quietly with a few guards, eating broth with spoon, bread soaked in stew. The food tasted of home, solace, saving grace. She shared kind words, steady gaze, offering what comfort she could. Lucienne sat beside her, offering bread, water, strength. Afterwards, in the library beneath torchlight, Eleanor, Lucian, Edward, and the guard captain gathered. Maps laid open, ledger, codex, reports of breach. The hidden side passage used in the attack corresponded with the traitor's map. Someone in the household had reopened Rotes. Eleanor's voice was firm. The final betrayer lies within still. One more must fall. They plotted a final sweep, locks changed, double guards, scrutiny, and watch rotations. Eleanor excused herself early. She walked through the corridors in the darkness, inspecting doors and locks, cloak over her shoulders, boots silent. She paused before the portrait hall. Faces of ancestors looked down. She touched the frame of her mother's portrait. She whispered forgiveness and vow. Outside, Lucienne joined her quietly, cloak wrapped about both. Rain still fell. She leaned into him. He said softly, "You carried them all tonight, even your own fear, and stood unbroken." She lifted her face. "I will not yield. I will rebuild stronger." He kissed her brow. The manor, battered, held. The falcon's flight would continue, and she would lead it. The manor's stones cooled in the aftermath, but Eleanor's spirit burned, and she knew the final betrayal was not ended, only laid bare for the falcon to strike again. Chapter 20, The Crown in Her Palm. The dawn that followed the night of fire and betrayal came soft and pale. Mist drifted across the lawns, the hedges and statues shimmering in dew. The rose bushes still bore blossom, though petals were mottled with rain and ash. Sunlight filtered through low clouds, lending the world a hushed silver glow. Inside Whitcomb, the corridors stirred. Servants rose early, moving quietly but with confidence. The house that had once trembled under shadows now felt steadied, vigil kept. Eleanor awoke in her chamber, pale linen curtains drawn, the scent of fresh sheets and warm hearth lingering. She dressed in a gown of pale ivory silk, the bodice trimmed with filigree of falcon feathers in shifting silver thread. The sleeves were narrow and elegant. Over it she drew a cloak of midnight blue velvet, lined in soft grey satin. She pinned her hair high, jewels gleaming in soft waves. The silver signet ring rested upon her finger. She paused before the mirror, pressing her palms smooth over the bodice, anchoring herself to what she had built. In the great hall, the breakfast table awaited. The repast was celebratory but earnest. Fresh rolls, butter bright and golden, preserves of strawberry and peach, soft cheese, smoked trout with dill, porridge enriched with cream and honey, and steaming teapots of strong black tea with a hint of mint. The aroma was warm and comforting. Eleanor broke bread, passed butter, tasted trout. She looked up to see Lucienne enter in coat of deep navy, waistcoat of forest green, crisp white shirt, breeches of charcoal, boots polished. His hair was less cropped now, curling slightly at the temples. The faint scar on his cheek remained. His eyes held pride. He took his place beside her. Behind them, the staff watched, some with relief, some with wonder. They ate in companionable silence. Every bite grounded them in the moment. After breakfast, Eleanor gathered Edward, the guard captain, and her trusted staff in the library. The codex and ledger lay open. She spoke of rebuilding, reparation to damaged parts of the house, restoration of sealed wings, openings to neighboring holdings, renewed trade, alliances. She proposed opening a new wing of the house, one sealed since her mother's passing, now to be her own study and archive. Lucienne and Edward supported. The staff nodded, bright eyes wide with hope. By midday, Eleanor changed into travel leathers for inspection, soft leather jerkin over linen shirt, breeches, boots, cloak of forest green. She and Lucienne rode out to inspect the outer walls, the repair work, guard towers, gates. The earth was muddy, their boots spattered. The walls bore fresh stonework, mortar still curing. Eleanor's cloak brushed damp masonry. She touched stone, feeling its solid reassurance. Lucian walked beside her, hand at her sleeve in quiet solidarity. The wind stirred vines, paths gleamed underfoot. The scent of wet grass and stone filled the air. They paused before the sealed wing, locked doors ringed with carved emblems. Eleanor traced the design with gloved finger. Soon, she promised quietly. They returned mid-afternoon. Eleanor retired to her solar and was served a light meal: cold chicken, herb salad, fresh bread, fruit, pears, grapes, berries, and a cup of mint tea. She tasted each delicately, the flavors soft but sustaining. Lucien joined her. They sat across the table, silence between them. He poured her tea with careful hand, placed a slice of bread on her plate. Their eyes met frequently, an unspoken bond. Later, Eleanor dressed for the evening. A gown of soft silver velvet, long sleeves embroidered with falcon's talon motifs, the skirt flowing, the bodice trimmed with fine pearls. Over the gown she wore a cloak of deep emerald lined with silver satin. She pinned her hair high, pearls woven in, a few curls teased out softly. She looked in the mirror, strong, graceful, whole. The evening banquet was laid long in the great hall, tables draped in deep blue and silver cloths, silver candlesticks burning, heraldic banners proud. The menu was sumptuous: roast venison with juniper glaze, glazed root vegetables, carrots, parsnip, turnip, sautéed greens in butter, fresh bread warm from ovens, cheese boards with herbs and preserves, fruit tarts with almond cream, and vintage red and white wines. The scent of roast and spices and wine mingled with laughter. The staff moved among guests, serving dishes, pouring wine, offering smiles. Eleanor entered in regal bearing, Lucian at her side. She greeted guests, lords and ladies who had allied, envoys from estates, neighbors. The hall glowed with warmth and promise. She presided, offering food, thanking, conversing. The burdens of earlier nights seemed distant now. The staff watched her with pride. As the banquet drew to a close, Eleanor stood and asked silence. She raised her glass in solemn toast to Whitcomb, stronger, just, renewed, to loyalty and truth. May the walls never tremble from betrayal again. Glasses raised, staff and guests cheered. Wine glowed in torchlight. Eleanor felt the ring's weight as she held her glass, sweat of victory mingling with hope. After dessert, with servers withdrawn, Lucien approached. He offered a small carved box. Eleanor opened it. Inside, a pendant, a small silver falcon in flight, with a single emerald eye. Lucien said softly, "For you to bear always." She touched it, tears bright. He kissed her hand. They withdrew to the gardens. Lanterns lit pathways. She wore her cloak over her silver gown, Lucien in dark coat. They walked between hedges, flowers faint in scent. She rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm about her waist. She said quietly, "We did it." He said, "Together." She looked at him, heart full. "Forever, I hope." He kissed her softly. The night air whispered across lawns. The walls of Whitcomb stood behind them, whole once more. In the light of alliances forged and walls reborn, Eleanor stood as queen of her own heart, and Whitcomb's crown was clasped lightly, yet forever in her palm. Epilogue: The Falcon's Heir. Spring returned to Whitcomb, not with fanfare, but with quiet, insistent beauty. The air smelled of earth warmed by sun, of blossoms uncurling in the hedgerows, of something just barely sweet, like promise. The old orchard bloomed again in pale pink, the fountains flowed, and the laughter of children drifted through the courtyard. From her window, Eleanor watched the household awaken. Below, garlands of flowers had been twined through the balustrades. Banners bearing the falcon's crest fluttered in the breeze. In the stillness of morning, the estate did not feel like a fortress. It felt like home. She stood in the center of her chamber, dressed in a gown of ivory silk, embroidered at the hem and cuffs in silver falcon feathers, each stitch a gleaming reminder of how far she'd come. Her cloak, a soft dove-gray velvet lined in sky-blue satin, rested on her shoulders like a mantle of peace. Her hair had been styled in loose waves, pinned delicately with silver clips shaped like wings. In her arms slept a small boy, no more than 10 months old. His hair was dark and already unruly, his cheeks rose-tinted from sleep. His tiny tunic was embroidered with a faint silver crest, a falcon in mid-flight. He stirred as Eleanor pressed a kiss to his forehead. Behind her, Lucien approached. He wore a deep navy coat, his waistcoat of emerald green, a color she had come to associate with his presence, constant, quiet, and strong. He stood at her back and wrapped his arms gently around her waist. "He has your eyes," he murmured. "And your stubborn brow," she replied softly. Together they walked through the manor, passing doors once locked and wings once silent. The great hall was already alive with voices and music. Outside, beneath a silk-draped canopy, a long table had been set. There were woven garlands, polished silverware, and platters brimming with food. The household stood assembled, loyal staff, villagers, allies, even minor lords and ladies who had journeyed to witness the spring celebration. The feast was a triumph of the season: roast lamb crusted with herbs, braised carrots and new potatoes, buttered peas, freshly baked rye and oat loaves, chive cheeses, sweet compotes of spring berries, honey-glazed almond cake, and citrus curd tarts crowned with candied violets. There was wine warmed with spices, minted water in crystal jugs, and a barrel of cider drawn directly from the Whitcomb orchards. Eleanor stood before them all, the child in her arms. The silver signet ring gleamed on her finger as she raised her glass. "You have seen this house in shadow and in flame. Today you see it in light. This," she looked to the babe, "is the future you helped shape. He carries your courage, and through him, so will Whitcomb endure." A hush settled. Then someone clapped, another followed. The courtyard rang with applause and laughter. A woman in a green apron, Maris, stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Bless him," she whispered. "Bless you both." Later, as the music played, Eleanor sat at the head table with Lucien beside her, and the babe dozing against her chest. She ate slowly, a bit of lamb with mint, a spoonful of citrus tart, the fizz of cider on her tongue. The chatter, the music, the scent of jasmine, it all swirled like a dream. Edward joined her briefly, offering her a glass of wine. "You've done it," he said. "No," she replied, watching Lucien trace the edge of their son's blanket. "We did." Then, with twilight falling, she slipped away. Together with Lucien and Edward, she returned to the reopened east wing, her mother's wing. The halls were newly polished, the draperies fresh, the windows tall and clean, portraits long hidden now hung with pride. The final room they entered held a writing desk and a chest. Inside, a letter addressed to her in her mother's script. Eleanor read it silently. The words were gentle, wise, full of love. There were no secrets, no warnings, only a mother's hope that one day her daughter would become the woman the house deserved. She wept quietly, then folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of the new desk. She stood taller when she turned. Outside, beneath the ancient lightning-struck oak, Lucien waited. Eleanor joined him with the babe in her arms. His eyes blinked open, soft and curious. Lucien touched her shoulder. "Does he have a name?" Eleanor looked down at the child. The blossoms swirled in the warm wind. "Thorn," she said. "Thorn Whitcomb." He would carry the name not as burden, but as honor. As dawn stretched gold across the orchard, Eleanor raised her son in her arms toward the light. The falcon pendant at her throat caught the sun and shimmered. Behind her stood Lucien, hand to her waist. Before her, the estate, the legacy, the future. Not just stone and land, but a life made. And so, under a sky that once bore storm and sorrow, the falcon's heir opened his eyes and saw only light.